Chapter 11:28. Luo Fan dispelled the thought that this gray pool was the space-time portal leading to the demon world the moment it appeared in his mind. The reason was that the aura of the realm of devils coming from the pool was too faint. It was so faint that it was not even comparable to the space-time that he had sensed in the Divine Son's memory, which had been contaminated by the power of the realm of devils. How could such a place be the realm of devils? However, even if he was sure that this was definitely not the demon world, Luo Fan's mood for this so-called trial road was already completely different from before, and he had greater expectations in his heart. Even if this road is not the realm of devils, it must have some kind of extremely special connection with the realm of devils. As he thought of this, his expression became calm. The portal of the trial road has been opened. You can go down now. If you pass the trial road, you will also come out from here. Xian Yuzi did not notice the change in Luo Fan and said to him with a smile. Luo Fan nodded and made a grabbing motion in the void. His hand penetrated through the layers of rules and laws, the nothingness under the rules and laws, and the unseen world under the nothingness. Finally, it reached into the gap between heaven and earth and chaos. As he clenched his hand, he grasped a mysterious existence and suddenly pulled it back. In his hand, a strange grayish substance appeared. After this strange gray existence entered the space-time, it began to expand crazily, like a bomb that had lost its limit and was about to explode. Fortunately, Luo Fan's palm was like the firmest cage in the world, firmly imprisoning the grayish existence. The grayish existence could only continuously collide in his palm, but it could not break out. What is this? Xian Yuzi was dumbfounded. Although he was a powerful practitioner who had set foot on the first step, because he was a practitioner from Earth, he was limited to the worldview of Earth's practitioners. Therefore, Xian Yuzi could not sense how many barriers Luo Fan's hand had passed through in the void. Just how deep did it go? He vaguely felt that this hand seemed to have gone deep into the great Tao. Under such circumstances, it was naturally impossible for her to find out where Luo Fan had taken out this gray existence. She could not even sense what kind of characteristics this gray existence had. He could only blankly look at what Luo Fan was doing at this time. Xian Yuzi's performance was slightly better than Xian Yuzi's. After all, when Luo Fan fought with her before, he had already performed this behavior for her once. She vaguely knew that this was an extremely extraordinary existence, and could roughly guess what Luo Fan wanted to do with this existence. At this moment, she only looked surprised. Naturally, Luo Fan did not care about Xian Yuzi and Xian Yuzi. He spread out one hand to restrict the grayish existence, while his other hand kept drawing in the air. Along with his outline, the grayish existence began to stretch into silk threads, crazily twisting above Luo Fan's palm and quickly swimming around. After a while, it had already formed an unimaginably repetitive three-dimensional talisman. After the three-dimensional talisman appeared, it began to struggle crazily on his palm like an untamed wild beast, changing crazily. Luo Fan had already expected this. He raised his hand and drew in the air again, but this time, he did not build a three-dimensional talisman. Instead, it was as if he was writing an article in the air. Dense, strange symbols kept appearing as he drew, and one by one, they were imprinted on the three-dimensional talisman on his other palm. As these strange word-like symbols continued to be imprinted, the three-dimensional talisman began to gradually calm down. Finally, after he did not know how many tens of thousands of words were imprinted, the entire three-dimensional talisman became incomparably calm and quietly lay on his palm. Seeing this, a satisfied smile appeared on Luo Fan's face. He raised his hand and patted the three-dimensional talisman on Sky Maiden. The three-dimensional talisman disappeared without a trace. The moment it disappeared, Sky Maiden's entire body underwent an inexplicable change. The empty lady underwent an inexplicable change. She seemed to have an inexplicable barrier with everything around her, including time, space, and even the rules and laws. Xianjuzi and Xianyuzi looked over and felt that Sky Maiden seemed to be in a completely different spacetime from them. That's good. Luo Fan smiled after doing all this. Sky Maiden felt an indescribable sense of security. At this moment, the air hostess only felt an indescribable sense of security in her heart. All the changes in the surroundings that affected her were completely under her control. Vaguely, she had an indescribable feeling that the world, time, and space had been completely destroyed. She could also completely eliminate the damage that the destruction would do to her with a single thought. With this feeling, how could she not understand what Luo Fan had done before? She was inexplicably delighted. Looking at Luo Fan's uncontrollable smile, she nodded in acknowledgement. For some reason, Xianjuzi felt a little strange in her heart when she saw the joy on the Space Maiden's face. However, she suppressed it with a thought, and her expression did not change at all. Let's talk about the compensation for Sky Maiden leaving the Snow Rain Court after we leave the trial. What do you think, sect leader Xianyuzi? Luo Fan nodded and turned to Xianyuzi. That's right. Xianyuzi obviously wanted to ask Luo Fan to keep the benefits first. After all, who knew if Luo Fan could pass the trial? However, she could not say that out loud. Hence, she could only smile and nod to express that it was natural. After saying that, Luo Fan nodded at Xianjuzi. He pulled Sky Maiden and took a step forward. They directly entered the gray pool where the valley used to be. After the two of them entered, Xianjuzi finally could not suppress her anger. She said angrily to Xianyuzi, "Why did you do this? You weren't so harsh in the past." Xianyuzi no longer had a smile on her face. She looked at Xianjuzi. Her eyes were apologetic and firm. She said, "Junior sister, this is all for the Snow Rain Court. Even if it's harsh, I have to do this." Snow Rain Court? What benefits do you have for the Snow Rain Court by doing this? Why do I only see a sect that treats its own disciples cruelly and mercilessly? Do you really not know how much of a blow to the sense of belonging our Snow Rain Court's disciples have to the sect by doing this? Xianjuzi said angrily. Xianyuzi's body shook. She looked a little guilty and helpless. But she did not regret it. She looked at Xianjuzi's angry and agitated expression and said, "Of course I know. Even you can see it. As the sect leader of the Snow Rain Court, how can I not see it? But even so, I have no choice but to do this." Xianjuzi heard Xianyuzi's words and looked at her solemn expression. She calmed down a lot. "What happened?" Xianjuzi asked. "There's already a change in the path of trials. If no one goes to consume the power inside, our entire Great Mountain Protection Formation will not be able to suppress it. At that time, our Snow Rain Court will be destroyed." Xianyuzi said. "Everything will be destroyed," Xianyuzi said. "But there's no need for the empty girl and her lover to go." Xianjuzi became excited again. "Even you and I can't guarantee that we can walk out of the path of trials safely. Even you and I cannot guarantee that we will be able to walk out of the training path safely." This. Xianjuzi opened her mouth, but in the end, she could not say that she was willing to enter and consume the power of the path of trials. This. Xianjuzi opened her mouth, but in the end, she still could not say that she was willing to enter and consume the power of the path of trials. Regarding the path of trials, she still had a rather deep understanding of it. With her current cultivation, which was known as the second strongest in the Snow Rain Court, if she entered under normal circumstances, she would only have a 50% chance of making it out, not to mention that the path of trials had changed, and the power was even stronger. Under such circumstances, she knew that if she stepped into it, the chances of her being able to escape would not exceed 30%. With such a small chance, and with the future of the entire Snow Rain Court as a bet, she did not have the courage to take such a risk. But, the person whom the Sky Maiden likes is only at the peak of the great completion of quasi-sage. With this kind of cultivation, even we can't do it. How could he do it? Xianzhuzi said. But, the person whom the Sky Maiden likes is only at the peak of the great perfection of the quasi-sage realm. Even we can't do that, how could he do it? Xianzhuzi said. But, didn't you notice that when he first appeared, who was he with? Now that you think about it, he was with the disciples of the sages. Come to think of it, he was with the sages' disciples back then. Moreover, it looked like they were on equal footing. The first time Luo Fan left Wu Dao Zi's dojo and appeared in this universe was when he left with Battle God's son. At that time, although the time that Luo Fan and Battle God's son appeared in this world was extremely short, and they did not reveal much of their aura. However, because of the Sky Maiden, Xianzhuzi and Xianyuzi were constantly paying attention, so they immediately discovered Luo Fan and Battle God's son, and even noticed the way they interacted. And because of the Sky Maiden, Xianzhuzi and Xianyuzi were constantly paying attention, so they immediately discovered Luo Fan and Battle God's son, and even noticed the way they interacted. And obviously, although this universe was a world of cultivation, it was also based on strength. If one wanted to have a sufficient status, they needed corresponding strength. Since Luo Fan was able to sit on equal footing with Battle God's son, who was a disciple of the sages, it was obvious that he had the same strength as the disciples of the sages. This was the conclusion that Xianyuzi came to. When Xianzhuzi heard Xianyuzi's words, she instantly remembered the way Luo Fan and Battle God's son talked and laughed. She also remembered the relaxed and contented way Luo Fan fought with her, and for a moment, she seemed to have come to a sudden realization. After a long time, she sighed and said, "What's done is done. Now, there's no way to change the reality. I can only hope that he's really that powerful. It's a pity that the Sky Maiden is in danger. I'm sorry. But if it wasn't for that, I would have no reason to let him enter the trial path," Xianyuzi said with guilt. Xianzhuzi sighed, waved her hand and said, "You can go. I don't want to see you anymore, and I don't want to talk to you anymore." Although after Xianyuzi's explanation, she could completely understand the reason why Xianyuzi did this, it did not mean that she did not have any objections, and it did not mean that she did not have any grudges in her heart. Naturally, she could not immediately give Xianyuzi a good look. When Xianyuzi heard this, she smiled bitterly. She knew that Xianzhuzi was still angry and would not listen to anything she said. She could only say goodbye, then turned into a ray of pink light and soared into the sky, disappearing from Xianzhuzi's sight. At this moment, Xianzhuzi did not leave. She raised her hand and waved lightly. From her cave abode, a magic treasure that looked like a stone seal soared into the sky and instantly arrived in front of her. When the stone seal arrived here, it shook slightly. It sucked Xianzhuzi into the stone seal. This stone seal was a heavenly abode magic treasure that Xianzhuzi had refined. There was a small world within it that was neither big nor small, but it could serve as her temporary abode. This was because she was worried about Luo Fan and Kong. She did not even want to return to her cave abode, which was very close to her, and would rather set up a temporary cave abode here. That way, she would be able to discover Luo Fan and the Sky Maiden the moment they appeared. Among the disciples who passed through the trial path, the one who spent the longest time was 1,000 years. "I'll wait here for 3,000 years. If they still don't appear by then." Xianzhuzi thought like this, and suddenly felt extremely annoyed. Luo Fan and the Sky Maiden naturally did not know about the conversation between Xianzhuzi and Xianyuzi after they left. The moment they stepped into the gray pool, they felt the time and space around them distort inexplicably. In a trance, they seemed to have entered a whole new world. Luo Fan's perception was many times sharper than the Sky Maiden's. He felt that the aura that belonged to the demon realm became denser and denser as the surrounding time and space distorted. It became stronger and stronger. By the time everything stabilized, the aura had already reached a level where even the air maidens could easily sense it. This is the trial path? When she saw her surroundings clearly, the Sky Maiden could not help but be shocked and said, In front of the two of them was a boundless starry sky. In this starry sky, there were specks of starlight decorating the pitch-black background. In a trance, the sky maiden suddenly felt as if she had returned to the later age of chaos. However, this feeling quickly disappeared. Because the stability of the starry sky, the stability of time, the density of vitality, and so on were countless times stronger than the later age of chaos. It was the specks of starlight decorating the background. It also contained all sorts of indescribable special powers that allowed one to casually grasp a speck of it and comprehend the various properties of the stars. In fact, if one's deduction ability was stronger, they could even go a level higher and clearly see the entire history of the stars from their birth to the present. How could such characteristics be something that could exist in the age of chaos? Even. It was not just the age of chaos. In any era after the world had shattered, the starry sky could not possess such characteristics. What an interesting trial path! Luo Fan looked at the boundless starry sky in front of him and could not help but reveal a faint smile. This was because of the characteristics of the starry sky. He did not even need to leave this place, nor did he need to go to any of the stars. He could easily comprehend the evolution of the countless stars from their birth to the present through the starlight in the surroundings, and then deduce the evolution of the starry sky from its birth to the present. Luo Fan was, of course, the existence with the stronger deduction ability. However, there was no rush. Right now, there were more important things to do. He turned to look at the air hostess and said, "Air hostess, I already know your feelings for me. However, I have never thought of finding a Tao companion before, so I don't know how to get along with you. If there's anything I don't do well, you can tell me." When the air hostess heard Luo Fan's words, a look of pleasant surprise appeared on her face. These words clearly meant that he treated her as a Tao companion. How could she not be pleasantly surprised? "There's no need for us to get along. As long as I'm with you, I'll be satisfied. Whatever you want to do, just do it. Whatever arrangements you have for me, I'll be fine as long as I can feel your presence. In any case, we have eternity," the air hostess said in pleasant surprise. This was her true thought. As a cultivator, the air hostess had never thought that she would become a Tao companion with someone one day. Therefore, she did not know how Tao companions should interact with each other. Since she did not know, it was natural for them to get along in a way that both of them felt comfortable and satisfied. Just as she had said, the two of them had an eternity of time. If they could not find the right way to get along in a year, then they would spend 10 years. If they could not find it in 10 years, then they would spend 100 years. If they could not find it in 100 years, then they would spend 1,000 years, 10,000 years, 100 million years, 10 billion years. In this way, they would definitely find it one day. Hearing the air hostess's words, Luo Fan revealed a smile from the bottom of his heart. An inexplicable sense of comfort rose from his heart. Using eternity to find the right way to get along with a woman as a Tao companion. Just thinking about this made him feel warm. At this moment, Luo Fan suddenly felt glad for his previous decision. How lucky he was to be able to become a Tao companion with such a kind and understanding woman. With a slight smile, Luo Fan raised his hand and took out a crystal stone from his universe in his sleeve. The crystal looked ordinary, but it was a magic treasure that Luo Fan had refined in the cave that Xian Zhuzi had arranged for him. Its raw material was a universe with countless living beings. Chapter 11:29. When the air hostess heard Luo Fan's words, she nodded and raised her hand to receive the crystal. She had already said that she would listen to Luo Fan's arrangements. With his words still ringing in her ears, she naturally could not disobey him now. As soon as the crystal entered her hand, she felt a strange feeling. It was as if the crystal in her hand was as heavy as a universe, pressing down on her to the point that she couldn't bear it. However, upon closer inspection, she realized that there was no trace of weight in it at all. That kind of contradiction was really indescribable. Since the empty maiden could cultivate to the peak of the intermediate quasi-sage realm, she was naturally not someone who was ignorant. With a single thought, she understood the preciousness of this magic treasure. Naturally, she was delighted and immediately used the most common method to wrap her will around the magic treasure. Through this process, her imprint slowly seeped into the magic treasure, allowing the magic treasure to gradually establish an extremely close connection with her. In the end, it moved according to her will and became inseparable. In the short span of a few breaths, he had completely refined this exquisite magic treasure. The moment she refined the magic treasure, she immediately understood the truth of the magic treasure. For a moment, an expression of extreme shock appeared on her face. To open up a universe out of thin air, and then refine the entire universe into a magic treasure, such a feat was truly grand beyond her imagination. Although it was rather troublesome for the empty maiden to create a universe, it was still achievable. However, compressing, condensing, and refining the entire universe into a mysterious magic treasure was far beyond the limits of her ability. In fact, it was not just beyond the limits of her ability, but also beyond the limits of her imagination. However, at this moment, the magic treasure refined from the universe was placed directly in front of her. It was easy to imagine the shock that such a situation had on her soul. My cultivation partner is even more impressive than I imagined. Such a thought appeared in the empty maiden's mind in an instant. An indescribable joy appeared on the empty maiden's face. After the shock, the empty maiden quietly comprehended the function of the magic treasure. No matter how mysterious the magic treasure's materials and refining method were, the most important thing for a magic treasure was its function. After sensing the function of this magic treasure, the Space Maiden understood the magical effect of this magic treasure. Her figure flickered. Her figure flickered and directly rushed into the magic treasure. Then, the magic treasure trembled slightly and directly rushed into Luo Fan's body, as if it had never appeared. This was because the empty maiden had directly activated the magical function of the magic treasure. She directly used her own spirit to contact the unknown billions of souls that existed in the magic treasure. She attached her body to the magic treasure, and then attached the magic treasure to Luo Fan's body. After this transformation, Luo Fan no longer needed to worry about her safety. As for the empty lady herself, she could also make up for the deficiency in her cultivation foundation and could sense Luo Fan's existence at all times. She had already attached herself to Luo Fan's body and was immersed in his body. If she still couldn't sense his existence, if she still could not sense his existence, how could she sense his existence? Seeing that the empty maiden was so straightforward, Luo Fan smiled. He was even more satisfied with her, and he was even more optimistic about the future of this pair of strange cultivation companions. After a few thoughts flashed through his mind, Luo Fan suppressed these thoughts. Right now, the most important thing to him was this strange trial path in front of him. One should know that countless powerful cultivators were trapped in the path of trials. Even if he was confident in himself, he would not be able to break free. Even if he was full of confidence, if he did not treat it seriously, it would not be surprising if he failed. At this moment, a strange space-time fluctuation was produced from all directions. Then, a pitch-black hole suddenly appeared not far away from Luo Fan. Then, a ray of light rushed out of the black hole. It rushed toward Luo Fan at an unimaginable speed. The entire process seemed to not take any time at all. As soon as it appeared from the black hole, it immediately arrived in front of Luo Fan. In fact, it was less than an inch away from Luo Fan's body. At this moment, what Luo Fan was thinking was, "Fortunately, the empty maiden has already attached herself to my body. Otherwise, I'm afraid it would be a little troublesome." As this thought flashed through his mind, the ray of light had already blasted his body. In an instant, he felt an unimaginable heat being produced from the light, which instantly enveloped him. This heat was so great that it was unimaginable. Even time and space were being melted by this heat. They gradually mixed together and formed an indescribable form. Even time and space had melted, so there was naturally no need to mention anything else. The starlight that originally filled the surrounding several million kilometers, the vitality that filled the air, and the aura that belonged to the demon world that originally existed in the entire universe were instantly turned into nothingness by the heat and disappeared without a trace. Due to this change, the void within a radius of several million kilometers turned into a huge black hole. There was no light, no color, and no matter. Everything seemed to have turned into nothingness. Did we succeed? At this moment, a voice filled with doubt faintly rang out from within the black hole. We should have succeeded. Although these foreign lifeforms have various extraordinary abilities, it's impossible for them to survive our universe obliteration canon. Another confident voice rang out from the black hole. The four directions are called the universe, and since ancient times, they have been called the universe. The universe obliteration canon is a canon that can destroy even time. It has a suitable name. However, it's still wishful thinking if you think you can destroy me with this universe obliteration canon. At this moment, this voice rang out from the huge black hole that spanned several million kilometers. It was Luo Fan's words. With these words, two giant hands suddenly stretched out from the black hole that was millions of miles wide. They abruptly tore outwards, and the huge black hole completely collapsed in an instant, turning into a formless void, revealing the scene inside the black hole. The surrounding starlight, the surrounding vital energy, and the aura that filled the entire universe instantly surged into the void that had been torn open for millions of miles like a tidal wave. In the middle, Luo Fan's figure floated in the void. He still looked normal. The universe obliteration canon, which could melt time and space, did not even seem to be able to lift his sleeve. As for the two huge hands that had torn apart the huge black hole, they floated in front of him. They faced the black hole created by the universe obliteration canon in an unimaginable manner. Fortunately, I still have this absolute defense on my body. Otherwise, that shot just now might have seriously injured me. Luo Fan's heart was faintly filled with anger at this time. The power of the universe obliteration canon just now was extremely terrifying. It could even melt time and space. However, compared to the attack from the second and third steps, it still lacked some special power. Therefore, the moment the universe obliteration canon arrived, the three-dimensional talisman that Luo Fan had set up since the battle with Xian Zhuzi appeared, displaying the power of its absolute defense to the limit. With a slight tremble, it had already repelled the power of the universe obliteration canon, thus protecting Luo Fan's body without any damage. However, it was clear that his body was unharmed, but that did not mean that Luo Fan would not be angry. It had been many years since he had been ambushed. Even if it was Xian Zhuzi, when facing him, he would still need to greet him first, and only make a move after his words did not make sense. At this moment, he had actually been sneak attacked from who knows how many light years away, and the other party had succeeded. How could he not be angry? After saying that, Luo Fan did not hesitate at all. He raised his hands and controlled the two huge palms to stab into the black hole that the universe obliteration canon had emerged from. That black hole was naturally not as big as the black hole that was formed when the universe obliteration canon was blasted out, but it was not small either. The two big palms could just barely stab into it. After the stab, the two big palms shook slightly and suddenly tore outwards. In an instant, the black hole was torn open. After the black hole was torn open, it did not reveal any normal void, nor did it reveal any calm darkness. Instead, a passageway appeared. It was a space-time passageway that was constructed by combining time, space, rules, and nomological laws in a strange way. How is this possible? We have encountered many creatures like this before. None of them could withstand the universe obliteration canon. How could this creature be unharmed? The voice that came from the black hole was now coming from the passageway in a horrified manner. Hurry up and break the space-time connection. Hurry! 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 The other voice did not sigh with emotion, but roared crazily. Amidst the roar, the passageway began to tremble slightly. It seemed like it was about to collapse. How can there be such a good thing? You want to leave after sneaking up on me? Luo Fan said faintly and raised his hand to point at the passageway. In an instant, the two big palms that he had just condensed trembled slightly and collapsed instantly. They turned into a strange brilliance that directly merged into the passageway, dyeing the entire passageway a faint blood-red color. Under this change, the trembling that had appeared in the passageway stopped instantly. The entire passageway even exuded an indescribably stable aura. It was as if the passageway could not be broken even if the heavens and earth were to be destroyed and the world perished. Oh no! The space-time connection cannot be broken. The other voice that had not appeared before cried out in panic. Blow it up! The voice that had threatened to break the space-time connection shouted decisively. Do you still have a chance? Luo Fan said faintly. His figure flickered, and he had already stepped into the space-time passageway. With another flicker, he had already passed through the space-time passageway in a few steps. He had traversed hundreds of millions of light-years and arrived in an unfamiliar starry sky. Here, there was a steel planet suspended in the universe. It was a steel planet that was hundreds of times larger than Earth. This planet was completely man-made. Just by looking at it, one could see that it was made up of countless parts. Faintly, there were countless stars shining on the surface of this steel planet. Around this steel planet, there were countless spaceships arranged densely. At first glance, it seemed that this steel planet was surrounded by a thick layer of black fog. When Luo Fan arrived here and saw the scene in front of him, although his expression did not change, he was secretly surprised. It's really a technological civilization. I didn't expect that a technological civilization could actually develop to such an extent that it can actually threaten the Tao Master Realm and even the practitioners who have set foot on the 9th step. Such a thought flashed through his mind. At this time, he had already seen that the universe obliteration cannon from before. It was fired from the steel planet in front of him. The position that the space-time passage connected to was on this steel planet. It was a circular metal ring that was very small compared to this steel planet but very large compared to ordinary living beings. It could easily accommodate interstellar spaceship. The moment Luo Fan stepped out of the space-time tunnel, countless attacks were launched from the numerous spaceships and battleships, directly bombarding the circular metal ring. The circular metal ring shook and collapsed with a loud bang, directly turning into a piece of scrap metal. With the shattering of this circular metal ring, the space-time passage was also instantly cut off and disappeared without a trace. Their reaction could not be said to be slow, but compared to Luo Fan's, it was still too slow. Luo Fan smiled faintly and grabbed with his hand. The countless spaceships that were arranged densely around the steel planet, almost like a thick fog, were like flies that had been swatted by a big hand. They all shriveled in an instant and then turned into balls of fire that connected together, making the steel planet look like it was wrapped in flames. How dare you do this? You killed 30 million soldiers of our 870th planet fortress. The voice that Luo Fan had heard previously was already hysterical. Luo Fan could clearly sense the despair contained in the voice. Luo Fan looked in the direction of the source of the voice and found that it came from a location on the surface of the steel planet near the muzzle of the universe obliteration cannon. With a casual grab, he directly grabbed the celestial body in that position, shrank it slightly, and pulled it in front of him. After this change, the voice was completely cut off, as if that person was too scared to speak. So they rely on this to transmit sound across the universe. I thought the living beings here could transmit sound across the universe at will. Luo Fan took a look and found that there was something that looked like a trumpet on the planet he had grabbed. Given Luo Fan's senses, he could easily tell that when this trumpet-like thing was working normally, it could constantly emit a strange medium that could carry sound and transmit it across the vacuum of the universe. At this moment, it was obvious that this planet had separated from its original star. It had lost its energy source and could no longer emit a medium, so it could no longer transmit sound. It was not that the person who had been hysterical was too scared to speak. With a gentle wave of his hand, that small piece of planet collapsed and scattered in all directions. Dozens of people were revealed. Among the dozens of people, it was obvious that only 3 of them were commanders with status, while the rest of them were staff members who operated various instruments. These 3 commanders were obviously the 3 people who had spoken to Luo Fan earlier. Evidently, the location of the planet that Luo Fan had grabbed happened to be this steel planet, or rather, the command center of the 870th planet fortress. What a strange design to place the loudspeaker above the command center. Luo Fan sighed. These people were the first group of living beings that Luo Fan had seen on the trial path. They did not look much different from ordinary people in the universe on Earth. They also had the appearance of born Taoism aptitudes, but they did not cultivate any power. Instead, they relied on the transformation of their bodies to obtain a physique that surpassed that of ordinary people, as well as a longer lifespan than ordinary people. Don't even think about getting anything from us. You won't get anything from us. At this moment, the voice from the command center finally reached Luo Fan's ears under the cover of his power. However, the one who spoke was the creature that seemed to be the highest commander. At this moment, these dozens of people were all shocked and desperate. Only the highest commander remained somewhat calm. Luo Fan smiled faintly. How could they understand his methods? How could they stop him from getting what he wanted? As he smiled, he raised his hand to grab their memories. At this moment, an indescribable sense of danger welled up in his heart. In the face of such a sense of danger, Luo Fan did not have time to do anything else. He directly drew a huge amount of grayish existence from the gap between heaven and earth and chaos and poured it into the 3-dimensional talisman that was protecting his body. The 3-dimensional talisman suddenly became thousands of times stronger with this change. It lost its original colorless and transparent characteristics and revealed its original grayish luster, causing Luo Fan's body to seem like it was shrouded in grayish smoke. At this moment, endless dazzling light shrouded the area. Along with the appearance of the light was boundless heat. It was a heat that burned time and space into nothingness and turned everything that existed in the universe into bubbles. The nature of this heat was not much different from the heat produced by the universe destroyer cannon. However, in terms of strength, it was tens of thousands of times stronger than the universe destroyer cannon. Chapter 1130. Under the terrifying heat, Luo Fan felt that the 3-dimensional talismans around him had received an unimaginable impact. Almost half of the 3-dimensional talismans had completely collapsed during the impact. Sensing this, Luo Fan could not help but secretly rejoice. Fortunately, under the guidance of his sense of crisis, he had attracted more grayish existences to strengthen his 3-dimensional talismans by 1,000 times. If he had still been confident in maintaining the original appearance of the 3-dimensional talismans, the 3-dimensional talismans would have been completely broken at this moment. Once the 3-dimensional talismans were broken, the impact would affect his body. Even if he did not die, he would be severely injured. If that was the case, then he would really fail miserably at such an easy task. However, although the 3-dimensional talismans around Luo Fan could maintain their existence in the terrifying impact and protect his body, that was all they could do. There was nothing he could do about the dozens of creatures outside his body that he had captured from the starry sky. This impact instantly broke through the power that Luo Fan had used to protect them. It instantly vaporized all of them, causing them to completely lose their normal bodies and turn into nothingness. Not only their bodies, but even their souls, their memories, and everything about them were completely turned into nothingness under this impact. The result was just like what the commander had said. Luo Fan could not obtain anything from him. The light, the heat, and the impact lasted for an unknown period of time. After all, time and space had been completely burned away. Even an instant might feel like countless years, and countless years might feel like just an instant. When everything calmed down, the surroundings had become empty. Whether it was the many spaceships that had originally existed or the huge metal planet, they had all disappeared without a trace. Similarly, they had all disappeared without a trace during the process of the change. So, everything on this planet was turned into energy to activate the universe obliteration cannon. No wonder its power has increased so much. Luo Fan looked around, and after a little deduction, he knew what had happened just now. He couldn't help but sigh inwardly. He was even more curious about the living beings in this universe. He was willing to sacrifice the billions of lives on the entire steel planet, destroying all the expensive instruments and weapons instead of letting him obtain any memories. This kind of determination was truly astonishing. Luo Fan floated in the void. There was no longer any power or information around him. There were no fluctuations left. Everything had been completely wiped out by the universe obliteration cannon. Even if he wanted to deduce where the civilization behind these living beings was from this information and what characteristics they had, he could not do it. He raised his hand and gently calculated with his fingers. Endless information flowed through his mind and consciousness. The starlight that had been completely erased had now filled his surroundings once again. With just a little bit of the characteristics of these starlights, it was enough for Luo Fan to deduce their characteristic. He could even calculate their entire history from the moment they were born until now. At this moment, what Luo Fan was doing was deducing the various aspects of these many stars. The purpose of this calculation was to find the living beings in this universe. After this deduction, Luo Fan was shocked. It was not because there were very few living beings in this universe, but because there were many living beings in this universe. The amount of starlight that Luo Fan received from this position was almost infinite. It was calculated in the trillions. However, Luo Fan was able to deduce that from the starlight emitted by the trillions of stars, he was able to deduce that almost every star that emitted starlight had signs of the existence of living beings. In other words, there were so many planets with life in this universe that they filled every region of the universe. This situation was far beyond his imagination. In Luo Fan's understanding, a vast universe had countless stars and even endless galaxies. However, among these countless stars, planets with life around them were definitely extremely rare. In fact, it was impossible for there to be a star with life around it among millions or billions of stars. This universe is not formed naturally. It's not formed naturally. In an instant, Luo Fan made a judgment. It was impossible for a naturally formed universe to have such strange characteristics. It was impossible for any star to have an environment around it that was just right for life to be born. Since all the stars had life around them, Luo Fan naturally did not have to think too much about it. He randomly picked a star that was closest to him, lifted his foot, and moved through the void. In the blink of an eye, he arrived near the star. The size of this star was about 1,000 times larger than the original Sun, and the number of planets around it was more than 100 times that of the original solar system. In other words, there were at least 900 planets orbiting this star. The orbital period between the planet closest to the star and the planet furthest from the star differed by millions of times. It's really incredible. Luo Fan looked at the star and felt the mysterious charm in the light emitted by the star. He could not help but exclaim in admiration again. More than half of the planets around the star had life. The closer these life forms were to the star, the stronger they would be. At the very least, their soul auras would be stronger. The farther away a planet was from the star, the weaker and the lower the level of life forms. Moreover, on the outermost planets, only the reptiles were left. Most importantly, the life forms on the planets in this star system did not follow the path of a cultivation civilization. Instead, they followed the path of a technological civilization. The entire star system was filled with countless small mechanical devices. The functions of these mechanical devices were extremely special. They seemed to have defensive and warning functions, as well as drawing and absorbing the free energy that existed in the void. The starlight emitted by the endless stars was turned into special energy that was transferred to the many planets with life. Spaceships of various sizes were shuttling back and forth between the planet. Loud sounds were spreading in this star system. It was as if this was not the vacuum of the universe, but the ocean on an ordinary planet. Luo Fan sensed a little. He knew that the reason these sounds could spread was because of the countless strange small mechanical devices that were scattered all over the star system. These small mechanical devices acted as a medium to transmit the sound waves, causing the star system to seem like an ocean. This is not the force that manufactured the planetary fortress. Luo Fan came to this conclusion after a careful analysis. The reason he came to this conclusion was that although the technological civilization of this star system was extremely advanced, it did not develop many destructive weapons. At the very least, there were not many destructive weapons for Luo Fan. At the very least, there were not many destructive weapons for Luo Fan. Not to mention the so-called universe obliteration cannon, even the inferior weapons that could harm pinnacle sage-to-be cultivators did not exist. According to Luo Fan's senses, the strongest weapons in this star system could only barely harm pinnacle sage-to-be cultivators. How could such a star system be the manufacturing site of the planetary fortress that carried the universe obliteration cannon? How could such a star system be the manufacturing site of the planetary fortress that carried the universe obliteration cannon? With a slight thought, Luo Fan's perception completely enveloped the entire star system. Although this star system was vast, even a primordial zenith heaven cultivator could easily envelop the entire star system with his perception, not to mention that Luo Fan was a powerful existence at the profound realm of Tao Master. It was extremely easy for him to envelop the entire star system with his perception. At the moment when Luo Fan's perception enveloped the entire star system, the countless small mechanical devices that filled the entire star system instantly began to riot like a hornet's nest that had been poked. A loud and extremely intense alarm sounded crazily, and the void of the entire star system began to shine with a strong red light. With such a behavior, one could tell at a glance that a huge alarm was being issued. It represented a danger that was enough to exterminate a race and destroy the world. It can even detect it with my perception. It's really incredible that this technological civilization has developed to such an extent. Luo Fan could not help but be surprised when he saw this. However, it was just a surprise. Even the universe obliteration cannon did not pose any threat to him, let alone the strongest weapon in this star system that could only hurt a practitioner at the intermediate realm of Sage-to-be peak. It was not a threat to him at all. Although it was not his wish to be detected by the other party, it was only because he wanted to avoid some trouble. Now that he was detected, he did not care. His perception enveloped the entire star system, carefully sensing all kinds of things on every vital planet. Luo Fan began to investigate the state of every vital planet in depth. At this moment, extremely special waves began to be released from many vital planets in this star system, and each of them surged in the same direction. That was the direction of the central star of this star system. These waves were very strange, as if they were many times faster than the speed of light. Just as they were shot out, they had already rushed into the star in a short while. It should be known that even in the solar system, it took 8 minutes for a beam of light to reach the sun from the Earth. This star system was thousands of times larger than the solar system, so it would normally take longer. Is this the power of the star activated? Luo Fan was shocked. Although he had sensed the various changes that had happened to this star since its birth, and he knew that the living beings in this star system had made some changes to this star, he had thought that these changes were only to absorb the power of the star to provide the vital planet. He did not expect that the changes to the star could have other uses, such as defense or attack. I was blinded by my past experience. The strongest star in this galaxy is this star. If the technology can support it, transforming this star into an attack or defense function is certainly the best choice. After thinking of this, Luo Fan couldn't help but smile bitterly. That's right. However, he felt helpless about his own slow reaction. After the waves poured into the star, a huge figure suddenly rushed out from an unknown position on the star. Although this figure was insignificant compared to the star, its size was at the level of a planet. After rushing out, many of the planets in the entire galaxy began to tremble slightly, as if the planetary system of the galaxy was shaken by this huge giant. Fortunately, the star was too big. Although the giant was huge, it was still too small compared to the star. As a result, although the planets shook for a while, they didn't stop. But it didn't really mess up the entire planetary system. It didn't take long for it to calm down. It was a giant that was as large as a planet, and it was completely made of flames. The flames weren't ordinary flames either. Instead, they were formed from the internal flames of stars that had undergone countless modifications. There were countless patterns that looked like electric circuits, runes, and talismans on the surface of the flames. The flame giant looked like a burly man wearing armor and holding a huge mirror in his hand. His face was a little blurry. However, the light in those eyes was definitely not the light of a dead machine. Instead, it was extremely lively, just like a real life. Interesting. Luo Fan's eyes lit up as he looked at the flame giant. This was a product of science and technology. Luo Fan could confirm this with just one look. Although this flame giant was extremely powerful, however, it did not give him the feeling of a cultivator. His entire body seemed to have gone through countless calculations and modifications. It was completely in line with various technological principles and could unleash the strongest combat power. It was a form that was shaped purely by external forces and not a form that had evolved naturally through cultivation. On top of the flames there was a pattern. He didn't know how to define it, and it didn't conform to the principles of cultivation. Instead, it was more like an indescribably complex structural system. However, even if it didn't conform to the principles of cultivation, it had another kind of mystery. It was almost like touching the peak of cultivation from another path. The flame giant gave Luo Fan a feeling that it wasn't any weaker than a peak sage to be. Compared to the weapons in this galaxy that could barely hurt a peak sage to be, it was many times more powerful. After the flame giant appeared, he raised the mirror in his hand and shook it. An incomparably bright light suddenly shot out from the mirror. The light was released in a diffuse manner. When it first came out of the mirror, its diameter was similar to that of the mirror. At most, it could only envelop an ordinary planet, but when the light passed through the first planet, it was already able to cover thousands of planets densely arranged in a flat area. When the light shot out to the outermost layer of the galaxy, the area it covered was already more than 100 times larger than the size of the star. Moreover, more importantly, these rays of light were clearly not ordinary rays of light. There were also countless densely packed strange patterns on it. They looked like electric circuits, runes, talismans, and even meaningless chaotic lines. Under the effect of these strange patterns, the speed of the light far surpassed the speed of light. The path from the center of the star to the edge of the galaxy, which would normally take more than 10 days or even dozens of days, was easily crossed by the light in just a few breaths. Under the illumination of the light, the perception that Luo Fan sent out was no longer invisible and traceless. Instead, it seemed like concentric circles of fluctuations were revealed in this galaxy. Through these concentric circles of fluctuations, The flame giant instantly turned the light around and locked onto the center of the concentric circles of fluctuations. There, Luo Fan's figure was quietly floating in the void. "Found it," the flame giant suddenly said. This sentence was louder than anything that Luo Fan had heard before. It directly suppressed the loud alarm that filled this galaxy. Along with this voice, the dazzling red light in the entire galaxy dissipated instantly. At this moment, the incomparably huge light slowly gathered toward where Luo Fan was. From the area that was the size of thousands of stars, it shrunk to the size of a planet. In other words, it was the size when the mirror appeared. From afar, it looked like a huge rod had rushed out of the flame giant's hand, penetrated half the galaxy, and directly stopped where Luo Fan was. "I see. It's actually a creation that took more than 30 million years to gather the intelligence of all the high-level life forms on hundreds of planets. Every time it's triggered, it causes damage to all the planets in the entire galaxy that can't be recovered for thousands of years. To think that it instantly triggered this creation just by sensing my perception. Should I say that you guys are decisive or arbitrary?" Luo Fan thought to himself. Just now, when the flame giant appeared and began to move, Luo Fan didn't just watch it like that. In the process, he was also continuing what he was doing before, which was to investigate the history of the many planets with life in order to understand the various situations in this universe. Chapter 1131. The flame giant was the ultimate defense of this galaxy and the crystallization of the most advanced science and technology of the many planets with life in this galaxy. Even the slightest bit of the technological content it contained was enough to allow a planet that was still in the inner stage to skip a long period of development and directly step into the interstellar era. It might even be an extremely prosperous interstellar era where it could control the galaxy. Of course, the flame giant that was created with such advanced technology could not be a simple machine or puppet. The flame giant itself was like a strange deity with unimaginable intelligence and absolutely unchangeable principles of action. Its unimaginable intelligence allowed the flame giant to not only unleash all of its power in battle, but it could also perform exceptionally well in certain aspects. That unchangeable, godlike code of conduct would allow the flame giant to eternally become the guardian deity of the many lives in this star system, and it wouldn't betray the lives of this star system due to its exceedingly profound intelligence. The flame giant usually stayed in the central star and continuously absorbed the star's energy to accumulate energy that it could use in battle. Once it encountered danger, all the planets with life in the entire galaxy had to come to a consensus and open up their authority at the same time. Only then could it be activated. At this moment, the flame giant shook its head and looked at Luo Fan, who was no different from an ant compared to it. There was a faint glint of interest in its eyes. To the many lives in this galaxy, Luo Fan's action of enveloping the entire galaxy with his perception was a danger that they could not resist. It was a horror that they could only resist by awakening their guardian gods. However, to the flame giant, it was precisely because of Luo Fan's appearance that it had a chance to awaken. It was because of Luo Fan's terror that it had been freed from the eternal confusion and darkness. Under such circumstances, compared to the many lives in this galaxy, the flame giant's feelings for Luo Fan were naturally completely different. Naturally, the flame giant's feelings for Luo Fan were completely different from theirs. In contrast, it was vaguely grateful to Luo Fan. Of course, this gratitude came from the intelligence that it had constructed. It would definitely not have any impact on its actions. Facing Luo Fan, it could admire him, it could be moved, but it would never change its mind about erasing Luo Fan. The flame giant took a light step forward. His body seemed to be moving under the guidance of the light emitted from the mirror. In the blink of an eye, he had already traversed millions of miles and arrived not far away from Luo Fan. This flame giant was the size of a planet. Under Luo Fan's disregard, The fireball that was like the moon directly hit the top of Luo Fan's head. Then, instead of collapsing, it began to condense at a terrifying speed. From the original size of the moon, it had condensed into a small ball with a diameter of 30 feet in the blink of an eye. Its color also changed from the original blazing white to colorless and transparent. However, even with such a change, and its power seemed to have increased by thousands of times, it still could not even shake the three-dimensional talisman around Luo Fan's body. It did not even have the power to make it appear, let alone hurt Luo Fan who was within it. Seeing this, the flame giant's expression changed greatly. Its intelligence made it somewhat grateful to Luo Fan, but this could not overcome the code of conduct that was given to it when it was created. It could not believe that Luo Fan was actually enscathed under its attack that could completely destroy any planet. This directly challenged its code of conduct. The flame giant suddenly roared. The mirror in its hand suddenly shook, and countless strange patterns flashed on its surface. The light that shot out from the mirror began to condense in an instant. From the original terrifying size of a mirror, it had already shrunk to a point in the blink of an eye. One was pointing at a small point between Luo Fan's eyebrows. This light originally had the magical function of detecting everything. After condensing into a point, the power of the detection increased by unknown times. It actually caused a strong impact on the three-dimensional talisman around Luo Fan's body, causing the three-dimensional talisman to gradually show its gray form. It looked as if a faint gray fog had appeared around his body. This change finally attracted Luo Fan's attention. He locked his gaze on the light that caused the three-dimensional talisman to tremble. A look of interest appeared on his face. It can actually condense the detection ability to this extent. It can actually trigger my defense. Let me see what exactly this is. As he spoke, he raised his hand and grasped at the air. In an instant, the mirror in the flame giant's hand suddenly shook and broke free from its control. Then, the mirror rapidly shrank. In a short while, it had already become the size of a palm and gently fell into Luo Fan's hand. With this change, the light that had condensed before naturally disappeared without a trace. It was no longer emitted from the mirror. After losing the mirror, the flame giant's expression changed even more. With a loud roar, it clenched its fists and separated the two sides. After grabbing something in the air, it suddenly slapped at the place where Luo Fan was. Under this slap, the surrounding space seemed to have turned into a substance that was many times harder than a steel plate. It crazily squeezed and smashed towards Luo Fan's location from both sides. Such a terrifying hardness, such a terrifying strength, if it was a normal situation. Normally, even thousands of planets would be turned into a pile of powder under this slap. However, it was a pity that this slap was aimed at Luo Fan, a Tao master of the profound realm. Faced with such a powerful attack, he just snorted faintly. It was an attack with decent power, but Luo Fan just snorted indifferently and raised his hand to grab at the flame giant. The flame giant felt its entire body tremble, and it lost all control of its body. The two arms that were grabbing the space and swatting at Luo Fan were stagnant in the air, unable to move at all. I originally wanted to let you have a little more time. Now that you're asking for it, don't blame me for what I'm going to do, Luo Fan said lightly. As he spoke, he slightly withdrew his hand that was grasping at the void. The planet-like flame giant let out a frantic scream. Then, it gradually shrank, and shrank again. In a dozen breaths, it had shrunk from its original planet-level size to less than 3 meters. It seemed like it had already become the size of an ordinary person. However, this compression didn't affect the structure of the flame giant at all. The flame giant's body only changed slightly in color. The strange patterns on its surface and the flame giant's intelligence didn't suffer any damage. Of course, this didn't mean that it had become stronger, nor did it mean that it had the ability to resist. It still lost its ability to move. After doing this, Luo Fan didn't care about the flame giant anymore. He didn't immediately comprehend the mirror in the flame giant's hand. Instead, he continued with his unfinished project. He continued to search for the history of the many planets with life in this star system and the various research results of these lives on the universe. This process lasted for 3 days. During these 3 days, the entire star system was shrouded in an extremely anxious atmosphere. How Luo Fan treated the flame giant was clearly seen by all the life planet. His relaxed performance was like an adult treating a naughty baby. It had long since obliterated the courage of all the life in this star system to resist. During these 3 days, they could only pray, whether secretly or openly, that Luo Fan didn't come to exterminate all life in this star system. The only thing they could do was to pray for God. After all, the flame giant, which was the most advanced technology in the entire star system, was like a baby to Luo Fan. There was no power in this star system that could resist Luo Fan. If Luo Fan really came to exterminate all life in this star system, they wouldn't even have the ability to perish together with him. Fortunately, Luo Fan didn't do anything during these 3 days. He just quietly floated in the starry sky of the universe. It didn't seem like he wanted to exterminate all life in this star system. This allowed them to barely maintain their composure. They didn't fall into a state of madness and self-destruction because of this. On the 3rd day, Luo Fan let out a long sigh. There was a look of enlightenment in his eyes. I see. The technological civilization of this universe has actually developed to such a level. After spending 3 days to fully understand the results of this star system's research on the universe, Luo Fan was secretly shocked. The view of the life in this universe was different from that of ordinary life. In other words, it was different from the life in the later age of chaos, or even any other era. The life in this universe thought that the entire universe was a boundless ocean. A river system was equivalent to a continent above the ocean. A star system within a galaxy. It was equivalent to a county on this continent. Each and every one of these prefectures formed a country. Some of these countries were only made up of a few counties. They were the weakest countries in the universe, which meant they weren't even considered to be in the top tier. On the other hand, the truly powerful countries were made up of trillions of prefectures and counties, and they even occupied numerous continents. This star system was called Gua Tuan County. The many life planets in this county were the villages in this county. As for the country that Guatuan County belonged to, it was just a small country that occupied a dozen or so counties. In the universe, it was a completely insignificant country. In the eyes of the real big countries, it was just a country bumpkin, a barbaric small country. An existence like the universe obliteration cannon. In Guatuan County's understanding, it was an extremely powerful weapon that a small country like theirs couldn't possibly possess. With the ability of their entire county, it would take at least hundreds of millions of years of accumulation to create the universe obliteration cannon. And even if it was done, each shot of the universe obliteration cannon was equivalent to the consumption of creating a flame giant. However, this didn't mean that the universe obliteration cannon was the strongest weapon in this universe. In fact, this universe obliteration cannon was just a standard weapon of those middle-level countries. Even those middle-level countries themselves had weapons that were more powerful than the universe obliteration cannon. As for those powerful countries, even the superpowers that occupied thousands of continents, even their standard weapons were far more powerful than the most powerful weapons of those middle-level countries. And in the legends, those superpowers had already mastered weapons that could destroy the entire universe hundreds of millions of times. It was only because these weapons were in the hands of different superpowers that the universe still existed and didn't fall into the state of one superpower dominating the universe. After understanding all of this, Luo Fan's slight underestimation of this universe completely disappeared. Instead, it was replaced by vigilance. He had personally experienced the power of the universe obliteration cannon. He knew that if he didn't use absolute defense to protect himself, Even if he didn't die, he would definitely suffer irreparable damage from the attack. And it was this universe obliteration cannon that was just a standard weapon of this so-called middle-level country in this universe. In this universe, only a country with more than 1,000 counties could be called a low-grade country. A country with less than 1,000 counties could only be called a low-grade country. From a low-level country to a low-level country, this seemed like a huge leap, but it was actually the smallest leap among all the countries. It was also the easiest level to cross. After becoming a low-level country, if one wanted to upgrade from a low-level country to a middle-level country, the number of counties was not in the tens of thousands, not 100,000, not even 1,000,000, but a terrifying hundreds of millions. In other words, only a country with hundreds of millions of counties could be called a middle-level country. This leap was so huge that it reached a terrifying tens of millions of times. And in order to upgrade from a middle-level country to a high-level country, which was the so-called big country, the leap was not certain. As long as a country could be formed from a continent, it could be called a big country. Of course, generally speaking, the number of prefectures and counties in a continent was calculated in billions or trillions. This range could not be said to be small. Even so, a big country was not the pinnacle of this universe's country level. Above the big countries there was still the super countries. If a big country wanted to become a super country, the leap was much smaller. It only needed to expand from occupying one continent to occupying hundreds of continents. As for the specific number, there was no fixed requirement. As long as the existing super countries recognized the country's qualifications as a super country, it would be fine. Chapter 1132. Luo Fan had never thought of such a grand and vast concept of a nation, which made him feel as if his horizons had been broadened. Just seeing such a universe is already worth my time on this road of trial. Such a thought flashed in Luo Fan's mind. After realizing how extraordinary this universe was, he valued the flame giant and the mirror in his hand even more. Compared to the cultivation civilization, the technology of the universe had developed to such a level. It was a different kind of mystery. The flame giant was the most advanced technology in Guotuan County, and from it, one could see some of the mysteries of this universe's technological civilization. In other words, the flame giant and the mirror were the key that allowed Luo Fan to truly understand the technological civilization of this universe. Relatively speaking, they were naturally more important than before. This galaxy is not the territory of a big country. The largest country in this galaxy is a medium-sized country called the Country of Eternity. Come to think of it, the planetary fortress belongs to that medium-sized country, Luo Fan thought to himself as his figure slowly disappeared with the flame giant and the mirror. Of course, Luo Fan did not feel any pressure from the spying of the living beings in this galaxy. However, this didn't mean that he was willing to be spied on by so many living beings. After all, it wasn't a very pleasant thing. In any case, he only needed to slightly change the way he existed to change the current situation, so why not? After Luo Fan disappeared, a series of sighs of relief came from the galaxy. Obviously, Luo Fan's previous existence in this void had brought a lot of pressure to these living beings. After the sighs of relief, there were waves of laments, curses, and curses. Because at this moment, they understood that their galaxy was the greatest crystallization of technology in Guotuan County. The greatest guardian of all living beings in this galaxy had been snatched away by that godlike existence. It took an unknown number of years to create this guardian, which had condensed the hopes of countless living beings, had disappeared just like that. Such a situation was heartbreaking, sorrowful, and terrifying to them. One could imagine. However, all of this was meaningless to Luo Fan. At this moment, he was hiding in the void, placing the flame giant that had been compressed to the size of a human and the mirror that it used as a weapon in front of him. What are you? After all, the flame giant was intelligent. Although Luo Fan restricted its movements, he did not restrict it from speaking. Before that, Luo Fan had things to do, so he couldn't be bothered with him. But now, he had done what he wanted to do, so he had plenty of time to communicate with him. Thus, Luo Fan calmly replied, "I am a cultivator." Cultivator? I seem to have heard of such an existence. I heard that it was a way to stimulate one's potential. It was a kind of life form that promoted the evolution of its own life essence. But I've never seen a cultivator as powerful as you. To be able to so easily capture me alive, it seems my previous view of cultivators is completely wrong, the flame giant said. To a technological civilization, cultivators were indeed a kind of life form as described by the flame giant. In such a description, there was indeed a sense of envy and disdain. This made Luo Fan understand the complicated feelings the beings in this universe had towards cultivators. They were envious of cultivators because they could evolve the essence of life and give themselves unimaginable power. That kind of disdain was the kind of disdain that cultivators had for their low utilization rate of energy and their inability to unleash the full potential of their powers. Just like the flame giant before them, the power that the flame giant used was only the power of a star. As for the stars, there were countless stars in the universe, and those powerful cultivators saw the countless stars every day. However, none of them had ever been able to create such a flame giant. Such a low utilization of energy was enough for the beings in technological civilizations to look down on cultivators. For any living being that grew up in a technological civilization, they even had absolute confidence that if they had the powerful abilities of cultivators, they would definitely be able to achieve results that were countless times better than those cultivators. Luo Fan had used his perception to sense the many details of every planet in the entire star system, so he naturally knew what the beings on those planets were thinking. When he heard the flame giant's tone, he only smiled and said, "There's no need to be so envious and disdainful. If you look at the cultivators of the cultivation civilization from the perspective of a scientific and technological civilization, you will only get absurd conclusions." Ridiculous? I don't think it's ridiculous. After all, the flame giant was not a real living being. After being captured by Luo Fan, it did not show any resentment. At this moment, it was actually debating with Luo Fan with great interest. Let's not talk about anything else. Just take Gua Tuan County's current civilization, for example. 80% of the foundation of this civilization is electricity. In other words, it was the energy of electricity that created the powerful civilization that could travel across planets at will, as if the gods were creating the world. What use is electricity in the hands of you cultivators? You only use electricity to attack, condense it into a ball, and throw it out. Even if there are some complicated ways to use it, it is only to create some special forms to increase the power of the electricity attack. Compared to a technological civilization, just this point alone is already a far cry from yours, the flame giant said. Although it was not a real living being, it was still the crystallization of the highest technology in Gua Tuan County. It originally placed itself on Gua Tuan County's side, almost treating Gua Tuan County as its home. At this moment, whether it was its tone or standpoint, it was similar to an ordinary life in that star system. You only know how to condense electricity into a ball to attack? When Luo Fan heard this, he could not help but laugh. He casually pointed a finger, and a bolt of lightning instantly appeared out of thin air. It rolled in the air and turned into a lightning spirit. Its appearance was vivid and lifelike, and compared to the flame giant, it was only much weaker in terms of power. In fact, compared to the flame giant, this spirit even had a trace of the aura of a soul spirit and an indescribable vitality. It seemed like there was not much difference between it and a real living being. After this creature formed, it bowed to Luo Fan and said, "Thank you, Creator, for giving me life." The flame giant looked at this unbelievable scene in front of him and opened his mouth wide, unable to close it for a long time. Is this creating life? To this flame giant that was created by the highest technology in Guotuan County. It already had a clear understanding of the level of the highest technology in Guotuan County had reached. Therefore, it knew that creating life was still an unattainable goal for Guotuan County. In Guotuan County, it could modify life, it could replicate life and even resurrect life, but it could not create life out of thin air. Don't look at other things, just look at this flame giant. Although it had great intelligence, terrifying strength, and a real body, still, it could not be considered a real life. Without a soul, it did not have vitality. A lightning creature that could change the course of a normal lightning bolt. How could the technological civilization of Guotuan County compare to such a creature's ability to use electricity? In fact, let alone Guotuan County, even the few medium-sized countries that the flame giant knew did not have such a method. What do you think? Such a method of using electricity is inferior to a technological civilization? Luo Fan smiled faintly. After all, the flame giant couldn't ignore the truth. He opened his mouth but couldn't say anything. Luo Fan did not stop. He pointed with his finger again, and the air trembled slightly. Instantly, a flame appeared. A stream of water, a gust of air, a piece of metal, an ancient tree, a piece of rock, and so on and so forth. Almost every material that the flame giant could think of appeared in front of it. After these materials appeared, they all rolled and turned into living beings with souls. They were living beings that were many times more advanced than the flame giant. Such a method made the flame giant speechless. He originally wanted to say that Luo Fan's attainments in electricity were relatively deep. This is just because you are stronger. Those big countries or super countries might not be unable to do this. The flame giant finally found this reason. Hearing this, Luo Fan faintly smiled and casually waved his hand. The creatures that were worshipping him and thanking him for giving them life were dispersed by him and sent to an unknown number of light years away. After all, he had casually created these living beings. He had no use for them now, and he could not be bothered to keep them. However, he could not bear to destroy them just like that. Therefore, he randomly chose an environment that was suitable for them to live in, tore open the void, and sent them out. As for how Luo Fan found those environments, it was even easier. Previously, he had experienced the light of many stars, so he already understood the state of each star. He also had a rough understanding of the various environments around the stars. Finding an environment that was suitable for the survival of many living beings was naturally a relatively simple matter. After doing all that, Luo Fan said, "That's why I said that your civilization of science and technology doesn't understand the cultivators of the cultivation civilization at all. It's ridiculous to use your way of thinking to understand us." Without waiting for the flame giant to refute, he continued, "According to what you said, we cultivators cultivate for the evolution of the essence of life. Tell me, what use do the various creations of your civilization of science and technology have for the evolution of the essence of life? Even if they are occasionally useful, how can they compare to the cultivation methods of us cultivators? Only those cultivators who have no desire to pursue the Tao would waste our cultivation energy for such a useless creation. Putting the cart before the horse is put before the horse." As Luo Fan spoke, a look of hesitation appeared in the eyes of the flame giant. Obviously, it had some understanding of Luo Fan's words. "As for you saying that I can do all this because of my powerful cultivation base, you're not wrong. It is indeed because of my power that I can casually use any energy to create life. Other cultivators whose cultivation base is lower than mine might not be able to do it." Luo Fan changed the topic and brought up the flame giant's rebuttal. The flame giant did not interrupt. With its intelligence, it knew that Luo Fan had not finished speaking. What followed was probably a but. As expected, Luo Fan continued, however, as long as any cultivator embarks on the path of cultivation, the methods they learn to use energy will far surpass those of a civilization of science and technology. That's because I've already laid the foundation for my method of creating life from the very beginning. In other words, from the moment a cultivator embarks on the path of cultivation, the creation of life is already an inevitable achievement. Of course, the premise is that they can continue smoothly, Luo Fan added with a smile. This finally made the flame giant fall silent. It wanted to refute Luo Fan's words, but when it thought about it carefully, it found that what Luo Fan said was true. It was the same even if Luo Fan said that when a cultivator embarks on the path of cultivation, the methods they learn to use energy are more advanced than those of a civilization of science and technology. There was no other reason. As long as the perspective was slightly changed, from the concept of a civilization of science and technology to the perspective of a cultivator of evolving the essence of life, it could be completely understood. For a cultivator, everything was illusory. Only cultivation was real. In other words, only the evolution of the essence of life was real. And a civilization of science and technology seemed to have a myriad of ways to use energy, but when it came to the evolution of the essence of life, it was only a very small number. However, it was only a very, very small portion, and the effects were extremely inferior. There was no need to look at anything else. At this moment, a powerful cultivator like Luo Fan could casually destroy the heavens and extinguish the earth, while a technological civilization, even a superpower, had to rely on weapons to destroy the heavens and extinguish the earth at will. From this point, it could be confirmed that a cultivator's ability to transform energy into a driving force for the evolution of the essence of life, it far surpassed a civilization of science and technology. In other words, in terms of energy utilization, it far surpassed a civilization of science and technology. So that's how it is. From ancient times until now, the arrogance of a civilization of science and technology is actually an arrogance of not being able to see the truth. The flame giant sighed. Its expression was somewhat lonely. Although it was not a real living creature, it was still a creation of a civilization of science and technology. Its own intelligence placed itself on the side of a civilization of science and technology. At this time, when it discovered such an uncomfortable fact, it naturally would not remain silent. Luo Fan looked at the flame giant and chuckled. He did not say anything. He just picked up the mirror in his hand and began to carefully comprehend all the mysteries of the mirror. This mirror was also an extremely high achievement of a civilization of science and technology. Compared to the flame giant, it behaved differently, but in terms of the technology it contained, it was not much different. As Luo Fan comprehended, the entire structure of the mirror began to appear in his mind. Every tiny component, every tiny line on the component, and every trace of energy on it circulated. Although he told the flame giant that a civilization of science and technology was inferior to a civilization of cultivation in terms of energy utilization, he actually knew very well that a civilization of science and technology still had some advantages over a civilization of cultivation. One of the biggest advantages was that a civilization of science and technology developed certain details that a civilization of cultivation could not compare to a civilization of science and technology. In other words, it was that a civilization of science and technology created things that contained creativity that a civilization of cultivation could not compare to. For example, on Earth, where Luo Fan lived before he transmigrated, a mass-energy equation was so simple. It was just a simple equation where energy was equal to the product of mass and the speed of light squared. Yet, mortals could use it as a theoretical basis to develop a terrifying nuclear weapon that could destroy an entire planet thousands of times over. The wonderful ideas and creativity contained within this could not only be described as amazing. As Luo Fan had said before, A civilization of cultivation did indeed have a higher utilization of energy than a civilization of science and technology. As long as one knew about these kinds of creativity, they would be able to use cultivation methods to create better results. However, a civilization of cultivation lacked this kind of creativity. And these creativity were what Luo Fan was currently comprehending the mirror and what the flame giant wanted to absorb. The material of the mirror itself was somewhat different from that of the flame giant. It contained more material substances, many special alloys and special energies. The composition of these energies was very complicated. Although there was nothing profound about it, it was extremely exquisite. It made use of all space and the functions of all materials to the extreme. When all the structures were combined together, the various energies changed, transformed, magnified, deformed, and transmitted power purely from the various materials. This resulted in the amazing use of the mirror. This allowed the mirror to emit such an amazing light and produce such a powerful detection ability after the flame giant injected the flame energy into it. This is simply a work of art. Luo Fan could not help but exclaim in admiration as he looked at the countless components, energies, and circuits. This did not involve anything extraordinary. Instead, it forcibly converted energy bit by bit through various transformations. For cultivators, this was a function that could only be accomplished with an extremely deep understanding of the Great Tao. However, there was an indescribable beauty to it. This kind of beauty was different from the beauty of nature. It was a kind of ingenious beauty. If these components were transformed into three-dimensional talismans and the functions of these components were given to the three-dimensional talismans, I would definitely be able to easily create a celestial device with power comparable to a great accomplishment sage-level magic treasure. As Luo Fan thought about this, a smile gradually appeared on his face. Ordinary celestial devices, even those with the highest number of restrictions, were not as powerful as magic treasures of the immortal path. The difference between a great accomplishment sage-level magic treasure and an immortal path treasure was as huge as the difference between a great accomplishment sage-level magic treasure and an individual immortal. If the power of a celestial device could be enhanced to such an extent, it could be upgraded to an immortal path treasure or even a higher-level magic treasure. One could imagine how powerful it would be. Chapter 1133. The reason why the modified celestial device could have such great power was actually very simple. That was, although this celestial device itself was a celestial device, in fact, each three-dimensional talisman was equivalent to a celestial device. That was to say, if the celestial device, which was composed of more than 100 billion parts, was transformed into a celestial device, it would be a huge celestial device that was composed of more than 100 billion celestial devices. Such a huge celestial device that was composed of more than 100 billion celestial devices would have a power that was more than 100 billion times greater than that of ordinary celestial devices when all of them were superimposed. Moreover, the way in which these celestial devices were composed was very delicate. The combination of all the celestial devices into an exquisite whole would only be more powerful than the superimposition of the power of the celestial devices themselves. In this way, the power of this celestial device could be comparable to that of a magic weapon at the great accomplishment sage-to-be level, which was not too exaggerated. However, the endurance of such a celestial device is probably not much different from that of ordinary celestial devices. Because it is so delicate, once one of the celestial devices is damaged, the whole celestial device will also be damaged, which is very different from magic weapons. Such a thought suddenly flashed across Luo Fan's mind. He suddenly understood that even if this celestial device was successfully assembled, it probably had a great weakness. Forget it, although it has such a weakness, it is after all a brilliant idea. If I can refine this celestial device into a magic weapon, its endurance will be raised to the level of a magic weapon. If I can practice them all the way to the peak of what I can do now, and reach the level of Tao Master, then let's not talk about how powerful this magic weapon will be. The ability to withstand attacks will definitely reach the level of Tao Master. Luo Fan thought so, but his mood was a little better. However, he also knew that this idea was somewhat unrealistic. After all, if this celestial device was finally successfully constructed, the unit of celestial devices that made up this celestial device would reach a terrifying level of more than 100 billion. To Luo Fan, it might be a simple task for him to refine a magic weapon that was worth more than 100 billion. He could do it with just a thought. However, refining hundreds of billions of celestial devices into magic weapons was much more difficult than refining celestial devices. To refine them into magic weapons at the level of Tao Master would be hundreds of millions of times more difficult than refining magic weapons. Back when Luo Fan was still a Khanate Grand Luo. In order to refine a magic treasure to the perfection stage, or in other words, it required a few hundreds of thousands of years, and it was equivalent to the innate golden immortal realm. Although his magic power was many times stronger than before, the growth of the magic treasure itself had not changed much. Although the time could be shortened, it was still unavoidable. Then, he had to refine these magic treasures to the level of Tao Master, which was far beyond the peak level. Compared to refining a great perfection level magic treasure, the time it took was tens of thousands of times longer. In this way, even with Luo Fan's current cultivation, it would at least take hundreds of thousands of years to refine a magic treasure at the level of Tao Master. In this way, to refine hundreds of billions of celestial devices into magic weapons at the level of Tao Master. It was easy to imagine how long it would take to accomplish this. However, it's not impossible. Creating the universe and speeding up the flow of time. It's not difficult. Moreover, these hundreds of billions of magic treasures don't necessarily need to be sacrificially refined one by one, but rather many of them can be sacrificially refined together, which can reduce the consumption of time by 1,000 times. Luo Fan was, after all, extraordinary. With just a thought, he thought of the possibility of realizing this method. Thinking of this, Luo Fan smiled slightly, raised his hand and patted gently. The huge mirror collapsed and then condensed again. When it was completely condensed, the power of this mirror was a level higher than before, and the aura it emitted was no longer the same as before. It was completely the aura of a technological creation, but added a kind of cultivation aura, which was the aura of a celestial device. Obviously, after the transformation just now, the hundreds of billions of parts in this mirror had been completely replaced by the three-dimensional talisman constructed by Luo Fan. That was to say, this mirror, at this time, had become a powerful celestial device beyond imagination. It was no longer an ordinary technological product. After doing this, Luo Fan raised his hand and shone the mirror outside. In an instant, an invisible and colorless light rushed straight out of the mirror. It spread out at a speed many times faster than the speed of light, and in the blink of an eye, it completely enveloped the entire galaxy. Endless information continuously surged towards Luo Fan along the light, and Luo Fan easily and completely accepted it. After some sorting, the essence remained, and all the impurities were expelled by him. Not bad, its power is a level higher than before. Feeling the information, Luo Fan nodded with satisfaction and smiled. Thinking of this, he did not continue. He covered the mirror, which had become a celestial device, with the heaven and earth in his sleeve. Although he had found a feasible way to sacrificial refine this celestial device into a Tao Master-level magic weapon, Luo Fan did not intend to start sacrificial refining like this. After all, this mirror was just a technological crystallization of a small remote county like Guotuan County. Not to mention the highest creation of a superpower, even the universe annihilation cannon that Luo Fan had encountered was far inferior in terms of technological content. In other words, the creativity revealed by this mirror was only at the bottom of this universe. In this universe, there were countless technological creations that were more creative than this mirror. In this case, if Luo Fan could find a weapon that could threaten a Tao master and carry out such a transformation, wouldn't its power increase to an even more incredible level? Under such circumstances, how could Luo Fan waste his time and energy on such a device that was obviously at the bottom? Can I ask what you were doing just now? Why did the power of the Hubble Divine Mirror suddenly increase so much? The flame giant had recovered from the previous shock and asked at this time. As for what he was doing, Luo Fan did not hide much and said directly, "Nothing, I just changed the structure of this so-called Hubble Divine Mirror to the power of a cultivator." You changed the structure of the Hubble Divine Mirror to the power of a cultivator? You mean you used your own power and the structure of the Hubble Divine Mirror to modify the structure of the Hubble Divine Mirror, so in the end, the power of the Hubble Divine Mirror increased by hundreds of times. The flame giant's eyes were wide open, and he said in disbelief, "You can say that?" Luo Fan smiled slightly and said, "Using ordinary energy. Doesn't that mean that our scientific and technological civilization is more powerful than your cultivator civilization?" The flame giant shouted. "That's right, we're able to produce the products that you need all kinds of special energy to produce. You still haven't come out from there?" Luo Fan couldn't help but laugh when he heard this. "Please answer me," the flame giant said very firmly. Luo Fan chuckled and did not care about his attitude. He said, "If you look at it from this perspective, of course it is like this. But if you look at it from another perspective, wouldn't things have turned out differently? We cultivators can choose the appropriate energy to increase the power of your weapons that have been increased to the limit. Isn't this a manifestation of our more advanced use of energy? You're just changing the concept. We're talking about using the same energy, and our technology civilization can do it better than the cultivation civilization." The flame giant frowned. "Maybe you're right, but if that's the case, isn't the topic going back to before? What's the point of saying that?" Luo Fan said with a faint smile. These words. Finally, the flame giant recovered from the excitement of finding a flaw in Luo Fan's words. Things were indeed as Luo Fan said. The cultivation civilization and the technology civilization were two completely different forms of civilization. Since that was the case, the two could not face each other with the same mentality. Since that was the case, there was no point in comparing the two thinking. The flame giant sighed and finally stopped talking. Luo Fan looked at the flame giant and smiled slightly. He raised his hand and grabbed at the flame giant. The flame giant's intelligence directly condensed and was pulled out from his body. The flame giant had no soul, no consciousness, and this was its intelligence. It was only naturally born from the structure of the body. It was an abstract product that completely fused with the body. If it was a technological civilization, at least with Guotuan County's technology, it would be impossible to separate the intelligence from the body and allow it to exist on its own. But for Luo Fan to achieve this, it was not easy. That was an extremely easy task. He didn't even need to use any techniques. With just a thought, this abstract intelligence would naturally manifest itself, directly forming an illusory shadow around the flame giant's body. This phantom seemed to be formed by a strange light. This kind of light was so wonderful that it could not be described with any color. Anyone who saw this light would have a strange feeling that this light was unfathomable and contained boundless secrets. These lights were in a strange balance between stability and change, and each light was being born and extinguished at an unimaginable speed. It looked like the stars in the universe had penetrated through the atmosphere and entered one's eyes. This was actually the light of wisdom. It was the light that naturally burst forth when the human body was thinking. To the flame giant, the light of wisdom that was in a fragile balance was its everything. Once the fragile balance of the light of wisdom was broken, the flame giant's intelligence would completely disappear, and the self-awareness that belonged to the flame giant would no longer exist. At that time, the flame giant's body would only become a puppet that resembled a robot. At first, the flame giant didn't realize that its existence had changed. When it realized that there was another flame giant beside it, and it seemed to be itself, it finally saw its appearance clearly and reacted completely. The body formed by the light of wisdom began to change rapidly, and the speed at which the light of wisdom was born and extinguished became faster and faster. A voice that ordinary people couldn't hear, but Luo Fan could hear it clearly, or rather, a thought came from the figure formed by the light of wisdom. What happened to me? Why did I lose my body? I'm just an abstract representation of the operation of the body. How can I manifest myself? Could it be that this is a soul that I didn't have before? Its words were filled with panic, disbelief, and inexplicable joy. This is your wisdom. As for the soul, although I can create it for you, if you attach yourself to the soul that I create, you won't be you anymore, Luo Fan said calmly. At this moment, he didn't even raise his head to look at the flame giant's wisdom. Instead, he locked his eyes on the body of the flame giant. What an exquisite construction method, Luo Fan praised as he looked at the structure of the body. The crystallization of technology contained in the body of this flame giant was more than the crystallization of technology contained in the previous mirror. Its construction method was also more exquisite, and the creativity revealed in it made Luo Fan unable to help but marvel. With a light wave of his hand, the flame giant dispersed. The entire giant turned into a sea of fire. The countless patterns that were originally carved on the flame giant's body were now scattered to every flame on the sea of fire like spare parts. Then how can I give birth to a real soul? At this moment, the wisdom of the flame giant asked carefully. Give birth to a real soul? It's very simple. Cultivate your own cultivation method. When you reach a certain level, you will naturally be able to use your wisdom as the foundation to give birth to your real soul, Luo Fan said without raising his head. At this moment, he had devoted all his attention to the sea of fire that formed the flame giant. Although the sea of fire in front of him seemed to be flames, there were actually countless small physical parts inside. However, because of the special craftsmanship, these physical parts had completely fused with the flames and possessed many characteristics of the flames, becoming something like an incorporeal existence. The countless patterns were actually like electric circuits. They didn't just connect all the parts. They were also responsible for the operation of the energy, allowing the flame giant's energy to circulate smoothly. All the parts and the power of all the energy were combined in one place, finally allowing the flame giant to exert infinite power. If I change these parts into three-dimensional talismans, the flame giant's power will also increase by one level. Moreover, after this change, the wisdom produced will soon be able to naturally give birth to a soul. It will become a real living creature. In that case, it will almost be equivalent to a great accomplishment sage to be. Luo Fan thought about it and was shocked. If his idea was really effective, then wouldn't it be equivalent to him being able to produce great accomplishment sage to be as he wished? Although this kind of great accomplishment sage to be would not have a future in cultivation and would not be able to grow to a peak great accomplishment sage to be or higher, their combat strength would not be too far off from that of a great accomplishment sage to be. If he could produce such great accomplishment sage to be, how shocking would that be? Just as Luo Fan was feeling excited, the flame giant's wisdom suddenly knelt in front of Luo Fan and said, "Please teach me how to cultivate a soul. I will do anything you want me to do." When Luo Fan heard this, he could not help but be slightly stunned. He finally raised his eyes that had been staring at the sea of fire and looked at the flame giant's wisdom. The flame giant's method of seeking guidance was not the style of the cultivation world. However, it was a creation of a technological civilization after all. It was understandable that its style was different. "You want me to teach you?" It's as easy as lifting a finger for me. However, I don't think I have any reason to teach you, Luo Fan said faintly. I can do anything for you, as long as you can teach me the method to cultivate my soul. The flame giant's intelligence was firm. Luo Fan looked at him, and a smile gradually appeared on his face. Although I don't think you can help me with anything. However, an intelligence that wanted to cultivate a soul and become a true living being was really too interesting. Let me see how far you can go. As he said that, he pointed at wisdom. In an instant, a speck of light of wisdom appeared on his finger and rushed out, fusing with the flame giant's wisdom. As the light fused into the flame giant, the wisdom of the flame giant trembled slightly. Then, the light of wisdom on its body flickered crazily. Then, the flame giant's body collapsed and all the light of wisdom quickly condensed into a ball the size of a fist. It expanded and contracted like a beating heart. Inside and outside this fist-sized ball of light of wisdom, countless rays of light of wisdom were circulating according to some strange law. All of the rays of light of wisdom were moving in mysterious trajectories. They interweaved with each other, influenced each other, and promoted each other. In the end, they revealed an indescribable vitality. It was as if some indescribable mysterious thing was being born in the light. The bit of light of wisdom that Luo Fan had bestowed earlier contained a cultivation method that Luo Fan had casually created. This cultivation method was created specifically for the existence of the light of wisdom. Therefore, everything in it was the most suitable for the flame giant's wisdom. In fact, it was only suitable for the flame giant's wisdom. Chapter 1134. Looking at the cocoon-like product formed by the light of wisdom in front of him, a smile of interest appeared on his face. He raised his hand and covered the light cocoon in front of him. In an instant, countless dense and complicated three-dimensional talismans appeared out of thin air around the light cocoon. Then, they intertwined to form a time formation. After the formation was formed, the time in this formation suddenly accelerated by more than 10,000 times in an indescribable way. After secretly measuring the flow of time and the cultivation speed of the flame giant, Luo Fan shook his head. This was still not enough. Even if it was accelerated by 10,000 times, with the cultivation speed of the flame giant's wisdom, it would still take at least thousands of years. Luo Fan was not interested in waiting for thousands of years to see if the flame giant had succeeded in cultivating. With a slight thought in his mind, countless three-dimensional talismans appeared in front of him again. They quickly changed outside the time formation, and finally formed another mysterious formation. He had set up another time formation outside the time formation. The time formation outside also sped up time by 10,000 times. In this way, the flow of time at the location of the flame giant's wisdom was more than 100 million times faster than the outside world. The flow of time was 100 million times faster. This meant that a year in the outside world was 100 million years for the flame giant. In other words, even if the flame giant normally needed tens of millions of years to cultivate the cultivation technique that Luo Fan had specially created for him, Luo Fan only needed to wait for less than a year to see the results of his cultivation. The continuous nesting of two layers of time formations was different from the world with two layers of structure. If it was the result of two layers of world, such as the major kiliacosm and the medium kiliacosm, the world itself could support this abnormal flow of time. However, this was not the case for setting up the time formation. After setting up the time formation, the terrifying pressure produced by the abnormal flow of time needed to be completely supported by outer space. If such support reached the pressure of two layers of time flow that was 10,000 times faster, generally speaking, even the primordial world or the great Tianyuan world would not be able to support it. Under such circumstances, to set up the two layers of time formations, the cultivators who set up the two layers of formation would need to bear the terrifying pressure of time and space for outer space. In other words, at this moment, these two layers of nested time formations were facing outer space. In other words, the pressure on this part of the universe was completely exerted on Luo Fan. If Luo Fan were to let go of this burden at this moment, then it would only take an instant for these two layers of time arrays to explode, directly collapsing this part of the universe and destroying everything in this starry sky. Everything inside the space-time formation was destroyed in an instant. Therefore, at this moment, unless Luo Fan completely ignored the final result of the Flame Giant's cultivation, he would either stay here to watch the time formation or carry the time formation with him. For Luo Fan, there were two choices. There was no doubt as to which one to choose. Thus, he waved his sleeve, and the sleeve universe suddenly sucked in the two layers of the time formation. The space inside the universe in the sleeve was naturally far less stable than the space outside the cosmos. Normally, if the sleeve universe was used to bear the pressure of the time formation on the outside spacetime, this space would not even be able to bear the 10,000 times pressure of the time formation. But at this moment, it was Luo Fan who was bearing the pressure, so it did not matter where the two layers of time formations were. Luo Fan swayed his body with a faint smile on his face. A faint smile appeared on his face as he took a light step forward. In the blink of an eye, his figure had already disappeared from the galaxy known as Guotuan County. Although Luo Fan had withstood the terrifying pressure of the two layers of the time array in outer space, he did not move in the slightest, nor was his movement affected in the slightest. He was already a profound Tao master, and the power of his divine sense had almost reached a terrifying height that ordinary creatures could not understand. How could he be affected by the pressure generated by the array he had set up affect him at all? The largest nation in this river system was a medium-sized nation called the Kingdom of Eternity. Such a medium-sized country had to occupy at least hundreds of millions of counties, that was, hundreds of millions of galaxies. Judging from the strength of Guotuan County, the terrifying strength of the Eternal Country had probably reached an unimaginable height. For Luo Fan, who wanted to find the truth of the universe and find a way to leave this universe, such a medium-sized country was obviously inescapable. Moreover, the Eternal Country was likely to be the country that had attacked his planetary fortress before. It was reasonable for him to not let this country go. As mentioned before, for some unknown reason, there were planets with life around every star in this universe. The planetary fortress of the Eternal Country could come to this area and attack Luo Fan from afar. Obviously, it meant that the border of the Eternal Country was nearby. Luo Fan crossed several light-years at an extremely fast speed, passing by 2 or 3 stars, that was, 2 or 3 counties in this universe, and arrived at the country of the Eternal Country. As soon as he stepped into this border, Luo Fan felt the surrounding environment change slightly. The amount of Yuan Qi was the aura of the demon world. Although it was still the same as other places, not much thicker or thinner, it gave off a completely different feeling. Out of nowhere, there was some kind of strange fluctuation washing back and forth in the void of the universe. This fluctuation seemed very mechanical, but also very agile. As it washed through the void of the universe, it faintly revealed a sense of exploration. Anyone who stepped into this area would naturally have a feeling that they were being spied on. Although Luo Fan's ability to conceal himself was excellent, when he stepped into this area, he did not completely conceal all his aura, but only roughly isolated it. Therefore, the moment he crossed the border, he found that the surrounding fluctuations suddenly had a strange riot. There was a vague feeling of being spied on. Luo Fan was slightly startled. With a slight thought, he raised his hand and gently waved it. The various kinds of strange fluctuations instantly calmed down, and the feeling of being spied on disappeared completely in an instant. Luo Fan casually made a grabbing motion, and an invisible fluctuation fell into his hand. It turned into a tangible, soft existence like a liquid. With Luo Fan's ability to turn abstract wisdom into a real form, it was as easy as flipping his hand to turn invisible and incorporeal fluctuations into a tangible existence. After carefully observing this fluctuation, such a thought flashed in Luo Fan's mind. It's not an electromagnetic wave, but a weak gravitational wave. The ability to entrust information is 10,000 times stronger than an electromagnetic wave, and it's more concealed. It's a very good technique. After comprehending for a while, Luo Fan released this fluctuation. He took a light step forward, and his figure followed the direction of the fluctuation, arriving in front of a planet in the blink of an eye. This planet was a planet made of metal. There were no stars around this planet. It was the only planet floating alone in the universe. It was like a huge, dead piece of scrap metal. That was the source of the fluctuation that Luo Fan had caught earlier. This time, Luo Fan did not directly attack the planetary fortress. Instead, he took a light step forward and landed directly on the planetary fortress. Through the probing fluctuation, Luo Fan could already tell that the main function of this planetary fortress should be defense and alert. It was not like the planetary fortress he had encountered before, which was used specifically for attack. This planetary fortress looked like a huge iron ball from the outside. However, standing on its surface felt like standing on an ordinary planet. The horizon was extremely far away, and the land appeared very flat. The various undulations on the surface of the planetary fortress looked like metal mountains. Luo Fan did not stay on the surface for too long. His figure sank down and he arrived inside the planetary fortress. The interior of the planetary fortress was a complete ecosystem, and there were huge cities within it. There was artificial sunlight, vegetation everywhere, and all kinds of vegetables, fruits, and grains were planted everywhere. Luo Fan's thoughts turned slightly, and his perception probed the interior of the planetary fortress in an extremely subtle way. Finally, he determined where the core of the planetary fortress was. The reason why he was so careful was because he had learned a lesson from Guotuan County. Guotuan County was just a rural place compared to the country of eternity. It was a barren land. But even so, when Luo Fan released his perception in Guotuan County without concealing it, it triggered a fierce reaction. He was discovered by the other party. In this way, the country of eternity's perception detection ability would only be stronger, and it would not be inferior to Guotuan County at all. If he did not conceal it here like in Guotuan County, he would definitely be discovered immediately. That would make all of his previous careful actions meaningless. Even though Luo Fan had released his perception in a subtle way as much as possible, the entire planetary fortress seemed to be aware of it, and the entire planetary fortress's vigilance had been raised. However, after all, Luo Fan's perception was too subtle. Although the planetary fortress was vaguely aware of it, there was still no way to be sure. Hence, it did not discover Luo Fan's existence. After discovering the core command center of the planetary fortress, Luo Fan stepped forward lightly and directly arrived at the command center. As a defensive and alert weapon, the planetary fortress's command center was, of course, busy at all times. At this moment, when Luo Fan came in, there were hundreds of people running around in the command center in a hurry, operating all kinds of extremely sci-fi instruments. The entire command center was filled with a tense atmosphere. If one were to control the planetary fortress, these living beings would of course be quite terrifying, and could even destroy time and space. However, the power of these living beings was indeed too inferior for Luo Fan. Even if some of them had been modified by the country of eternity, and had become powerful enough to be comparable to ordinary itinerant immortals, they were just like ants to Luo Fan. Therefore, Luo Fan was able to easily control everyone's mind with just a slight movement of his mind. All the living beings stopped in their tracks in an instant. This is the limitation of a technological civilization. Luo Fan sighed and walked to the highest center of the command center, in front of the highest command center. This highest command center was the core and the most important position of the entire command center, and the instruments here were naturally the most complicated. Even Luo Fan had a feeling of helplessness when he saw the instruments on the highest command center for the first time. However, this was obviously not a problem for him. With a slight thought, Luo Fan raised his hand and beckoned at the middle-aged man who was standing on the highest command center, who was in high spirits. A formless and strange radiance separated from the middle-aged man's head and fell directly into Luo Fan's hand. Luo Fan raised his other hand and slowly stroked the formless radiance, and his eyes seemed to flash with countless lights. The radiance that floated out of the middle-aged man's head was none other than the middle-aged man's memories. And now, when Luo Fan stroked the radiance, he was using a special method to read these memories. After a while, Luo Fan smiled, finally understanding how to control the highest command center. He even had a rough idea of the country of eternity's situation. Of course, the memories obtained from the memories of a certain living being that belonged to a vast nation were limited to general knowledge that ordinary citizens should know. Such a harvest was naturally enough for ordinary people to survive in the country of eternity. But for Luo Fan, who wanted to understand everything about the country of eternity, naturally it was far from enough. After sending the middle-aged man away, Luo Fan sat on the highest command seat and began to operate the command center with great interest. He constantly read all kinds of information about the country of eternity contained in this planetary fortress. The first thing Luo Fan pulled out was a map of the entire country of eternity. As a huge nation with a solar system as a county, its map was a complete three-dimensional star map. The entire map looked like a slice of the starry sky above. The hundreds of millions of stars formed a nearly spherical shape. The stars' radiance was like stars in the sky. It looked like a dense expanse of starlight, almost dyeing this sphere as if it was completely condensed from starlight. I should be here now. The capital of the country of eternity should be here. Luo Fan's eyes locked onto a position on the edge of the sphere, as well as a position in the center of the sphere. The star in the center of the sphere was thousands of times brighter than the other stars. Obviously, the size of this star was at least thousands of times larger than the other stars. Zooming in on the map, he locked onto the star in the center. In an instant, the light and shadow changed. A vast star system appeared in front of Luo Fan. The central star of this star system was at least 10,000 times larger than the central star of Guotuan County that Luo Fan had seen before. In comparison, the central star of Guotuan County was like a ping-pong ball in front of a basketball. Around this star, there were more planets than Guotuan County, which was completely different from what Luo Fan had expected. There was only one planet around this huge star. It was an incomparably huge planet that was not much smaller than the star itself. This planet was huge. When the surface area was spread out, it could only be described in units of light seconds or light hours. It's actually a star system with a single planet. Such a fantastic idea is really amazing. Luo Fan looked at the structure of this star system. He could not help but exclaim in admiration. Of course, what he was praising was only their creativity, which was their fantastic ideas. After all, for Luo Fan, it couldn't be easier to do the same thing. Naturally, he was not interested in how they managed to transform a star system into something like this. The surface of this planet was shrouded in clouds and mist. There seemed to be no trace of any technological creation at all. The entire surface of the planet maintained a natural landscape. It was hard to believe that this was the great capital of a technological civilization. Luo Fan clicked on the introduction of this planet. There was not much to the introduction, but just the small amount of information revealed was enough to let Luo Fan know how unreliable the natural landscape on the surface of this planet was. On this planet, there was a creation called the Space-Time Remodeling Device. The name of this Space-Time Remodeling Device was far less domineering than the Universe Obliteration Cannon. However, its power was more than 1,000,000 times stronger than the universe obliteration cannon. The universe obliteration cannon could melt time and space. Its power seemed so terrifying that it could even hurt a greater mastery sage to be. However, it was like a toothpick placed in front of a nuclear weapon when placed in front of the space-time remodeling device. This space-time remodeling device could easily modify an area that was measured in units of light years. This kind of modification was not ordinary. It was a modification that could completely mold time and space like plasticine. Things like reversing time, creating time mazes, opening up worlds, and solidifying time and space were just child's play. The power of such a modification was obviously extremely terrifying. In the face of such a terrifying modification, even if the universe obliteration cannon was as powerful as the explosion of the planetary fortress, that Luo Fan had to strengthen the power of the three-dimensional talisman to be able to withstand, it could not affect time and space at all. Apart from that, the countless other functions of the space-time remodeling device made Luo Fan shudder. He was secretly glad that he did not directly crash into the capital of the country of eternity. Chapter 1135. Just as Luo Fan was shocked by the power of the spacetime modifier, the planetary fortress suddenly rang with an incomparably sharp siren. The sound of the siren spread to every corner of the planetary fortress, every inch of space. Under such a siren, the planetary fortress instantly became noisy. Almost all the living beings living on the planetary fortress were screaming. Because the residents of the planetary fortress were already very clear about such a siren. This meant that the entire planetary fortress was about to be abandoned, and all the residents were about to be completely destroyed. For the nation of eternity, which had hundreds of millions of galaxies, the number of people had almost reached a terrifying level that could not be described with numbers. Although there were hundreds of millions of people living on the planetary fortress, compared to the entire nation of eternity, it was not even comparable to a single hair from 9 oxen. When the nation of eternity encountered a certain degree of danger, it was, of course, natural for the nation of eternity to completely abandon the entire planetary fortress along with its hundreds of millions of people. However, if such a natural thing were to happen to the hundreds of millions of people on the planetary fortress, it would be a disaster of despair and annihilation. Under such circumstances, when the residents of the planetary fortress heard such a sharp and terrifying siren, how could they not turn pale with fright and become hysterical? With a slight thought, Luo Fan's perception invaded the memory of a creature who was screaming hysterically, and he instantly discovered the meaning of this siren. For a moment, his expression changed slightly. The destruction of the planetary fortress did not pose much of a threat to him. Even if there were weapons of the level of the universe obliteration cannon here, they would not be able to break through the three-dimensional talisman constructed by the gray existence around him, let alone hurt him. Therefore, the damage caused by the destruction of the planetary fortress did not affect him much at all. What made his expression change slightly was the reason why the planetary fortress was about to be destroyed. Why was the planetary fortress about to be completely destroyed without any warning? This was what Luo Fan was concerned about. Did I miss something and let them discover my existence? Such a thought flashed in his mind. With a thought, his perception instantly enveloped the entire planetary fortress. He had investigated the planetary fortress previously. He had completely figured out the specific operating mechanism of the planetary fortress. At this moment, he instantly felt the changes that were happening inside the planetary fortress. At the center of the planetary fortress was the core of the planetary fortress. It was also the power core of the entire planetary fortress, which was equivalent to the power source of the planetary fortress. A shocking change was taking place. Endless energy seemed to be born out of thin air, frantically pouring into the power core of this planetary fortress. Under the infusion of this boundless energy, The power core that was originally material gradually became like a body of energy, gradually emitting an indescribable light. The light penetrated through the layers of barriers and seeped through the originally tight gaps of the planetary fortress. Finally, it broke through the surface of the planetary fortress. From the outside, the entire planetary fortress looked like a bomb that was about to explode from within. Due to the infusion of the energy, the amount was simply too great. In the end, it caused an astonishing change in time and space, completely separating the huge volume of space-time where the core of the planetary fortress was located from the outside world. Even the internal nomological laws were completely bunched up during this process, forming an extremely strange defense that blocked Luo Fan's perception. Blocking Luo Fan's perception, Luo Fan felt that he needed to increase his perception by more than 10 times in order to break through the defense and discover the changes inside the core. As more and more energy poured into it out of thin air, the light emitted by the power core also became more and more intense, and as the changes occurred, the light that was emitted from the power core gradually became more and more intense. As the light changed, it also gradually gained that strange quality, bringing out the changes that were happening within the power core along with the light. As a result, the change in space-time and the area where the rules and laws were clumped together continued to expand. It was originally limited to the core of the planet where the power core was located, but it continued to expand outward. In just a breath's time, it had already expanded to the entire planetary fortress. Next, the muzzles of the universe destroyer cannons on the planetary fortress changed from their original outward direction to the direction of the power core of the planetary fortress. Following this change, the surface of the planetary fortress was directly covered with a thick barrier that seemed to have been formed by some strange processing of time and space. This barrier was crystal clear. It looked like an ordinary crystal, but it naturally exuded an indescribable, unbreakable, and terrifying aura. This aura gave off the feeling that it wanted to be broken. One needed to have the power to destroy a universe and a spacetime in order to do so. Needless to say, Luo Fan's perception was very fast. Although only a short period of time had passed since the siren sounded, it had only been less than a breath's time from the change in the power core below to the appearance of a huge, translucent, crystal-like barrier on the surface of the planetary fortress. However, in such a short period of time, Luo Fan had already investigated everything. At least, this was everything he needed to know. This is the power of the space-time modifier. It is indeed terrifyingly powerful. At this time, Luo Fan had already found the source of the changes that had happened to the planetary fortress. For a moment, he could not help but feel shocked and amazed. The layer of strange barrier that was sealing off the entire planetary fortress was indeed modified by time and space. Although the defensive ability of this barrier was far inferior to that of the three-dimensional talisman constructed by the grayish existence that he had attached to his body, it was still an extremely shocking defense. Such a defense could almost withstand the impact of the destruction of the world. Crystal Wall, this name is quite appropriate. Not only did he find the source of the changes that had caused the entire planetary fortress to change, but he also found the name of the layer of crystal outside the planetary fortress through the command platform that he was consulting. The reason why this name was appropriate was that before Luo Fan had transmigrated, he had heard of a legend on Earth that the barriers between countless multiverses were layers of crystal walls. The barrier that was formed by the modification of time and space before him clearly had some charm. It also had a certain charm to it. It was indeed quite appropriate to call it a crystal wall. At this moment, the universe obliteration cannon that was aimed at the power core finally fired. An extremely fast light shot out of the universe obliteration cannon, penetrated the layers of metal barriers, and blasted into the power core of the planetary fortress. Boundless heat erupted from the light shot out of the universe obliteration cannon at the moment of the bombardment, and time and space were in complete chaos at this moment. The nomological laws that were originally clumped together to form a layer of strange defense collapsed completely in an instant, revealing the strange existence that was still a physical entity at the center of the power core. It was an existence that even the universe obliteration canon could not shake. It was a whole entity that only had an hour hand, a minute hand, and a dial without any markings. Is this the space-time modifier? When Luo Fan saw this strange object, his eyes lit up, and he took a light step forward. In the blink of an eye, he had already penetrated the layers of barriers and arrived at the core of the universe obliteration cannon's bombardment, arriving in front of the object. Unfortunately, even though Luo Fan's speed was extremely fast, reaching an unimaginable and even surpassing the limits of time, when he appeared in front of the object trembled slightly before disappearing without a trace. There were no strange fluctuations or special changes during the entire process of its disappearance. It was as if the object had never existed and what was left behind was just a shadow of nothingness. No, it wasn't even a shadow of nothingness. Even if it was a shadow of nothingness, when it disappeared in front of Luo Fan, there would definitely be special changes that he could detect. However, the object in front of him didn't change at all. This meant that this object couldn't even be considered a shadow, but an indescribable phenomenon. Seeing this, Luo Fan didn't hesitate. He lifted his hand and covered the place where the shadow had disappeared. In an instant, time reversed. The light and shadow reassembled. The surrounding time, space, and even the heat produced by the universe obliteration cannon and the light from the universe obliteration cannon started to reverse time with this change and reappeared in the blink of an eye. This was the appearance of the object when it still existed here. However, apart from that object, it didn't appear at all. That object didn't appear at all. It was as if that object didn't exist at that moment, as if it had never been here before. The space-time modifier is indeed powerful. It's just a bit of energy, and it's not affected by the reversal of time. Luo Fan sighed and finally gave up on the idea of continuing to search for the object. Although the object appeared for an extremely short period of time, to the point where Luo Fan couldn't even touch it with his own hands or with his senses, he knew immediately that it was just a bit of energy that had been modified by the space-time modifier and contained some of the space-time modifier's power. The crystal wall that appeared around the planetary fortress was the result of the modification of the space-time modifier's energy. And this energy had obviously been completely used up in such a transformation, and then completely disappeared without a trace. What Luo Fan saw and sensed was a trace left behind by the energy in time before it disappeared. In essence, it was similar to a mark. It was just more illusory, harder to perceive, and harder to grasp. It was similar to a mark of an abstract phenomenon. The traces imprinted on time itself were integrated with time itself. Under such circumstances, it was impossible for Luo Fan to reverse time and find the imprint. It was even more impossible for him to go back to the time when the energy still existed to see what it looked like. This space-time modifier is really making me more and more interested. A faint smile appeared on Luo Fan's face as this thought flashed across his mind. The surrounding universe obliteration cannons seemed to be facing an enemy that wouldn't rest until one of them was dead. They fired one shot after another in a frenzy. The indescribable heat had already turned the entire planetary fortress into nothingness. It had even turned the space-time where the planetary fortress was located into an illusion. At this moment, only Luo Fan and the universe obliteration cannon were left at the original location of the planetary fortress. Only a small portion of the universe obliteration cannon was left, and even its firing function was gradually disappearing. However, amidst such a terrifying scene, Luo Fan still had a smile on his face. His expression was calm and unhurried. It was really shocking to the extreme. At this moment, a faint gray light flickered around Luo Fan's body. A blurry three-dimensional talisman appeared and disappeared from time to time. The terrifying heat that could even turn time and space into nothingness around him was compressed by the crystal wall outside and could not spread out. It could only shrink and increase its power. However, it could only make his three-dimensional talisman appear a little bit. This process lasted for quite a while. Only when the universe obliteration cannon couldn't take it anymore and finally disappeared completely did all these changes gradually calm down. Of course, this calming down only meant that the universe obliteration cannon had stopped firing and the heat no longer increased infinitely. However, it didn't mean that the heat would disappear immediately. It didn't mean that the interior of the crystal wall would return to normal immediately. After all, the crystal wall outside was a terrifying barrier that even the previous attacks couldn't break. It was so airtight, so complete, and didn't transmit heat. Under such circumstances, how could the heat inside be dispersed so easily? Under normal circumstances, the heat inside would indeed continue to weaken, but the speed of that weakening would be unimaginably slow. It might even take billions of years before it could completely return to normal. Is that all? Luo Fan looked around and couldn't help but feel a little disappointed. Such a terrifying attack might be fatal to ordinary cultivators, but to cultivators who could withstand the universe obliteration cannon, such an attack was nothing. If it was really only this attack, then there would be no need for the spacetime modifier's energy to exist here. Just as Luo Fan was thinking about this, the crystal sphere suddenly changed slightly. The surrounding temperature suddenly rose along with this change. Moreover, the speed of the increase was also getting faster and more terrifying. It was as if there was no limit at all. There's a change indeed. This is interesting. Luo Fan's eyes instantly lit up. He had already discovered the changes that were happening to the crystal sphere. At this moment, the crystal sphere was resolutely shrinking. This shrinking speed wasn't considered fast. However, it was almost unstoppable and unstoppable. The shrinking of the crystal sphere produced an indescribable compression force on the heat inside the sphere. Under this compression force, the heat inside the sphere was compressed to the point where it could not be measured at all. Under this compression force, the terrifying heat that could originally completely turn time and space into nothingness continued to grow. Under this heat, the nothingness of time and space also gradually dissipated. A strange state that seemed to be neither there nor nothing gradually appeared where Luo Fan was. Faintly, Luo Fan could even feel that an indescribably great existence had appeared around him. It's actually the unseen. Seeing this, Luo Fan couldn't help but smile helplessly. As it turned out, the place where the heat was burning was none other than the unseen place where the great Tao resided. The great existence that he could feel through the heat was something similar to the great Tao in this universe. After the heat became so terrifying, the three-dimensional talisman around his body finally fully manifested. The complicated and profound three-dimensional talisman moved crazily around Luo Fan's body, and all sorts of unfathomable profoundness kept seeping out from it. The surrounding heat that had been burned to nothingness was completely isolated by the three-dimensional talisman. Not only did it not harm Luo Fan, who was protected by the three-dimensional talisman, its greatest function was to make the three-dimensional talisman around Luo Fan's body even more mysterious, clearer, and more powerful. Back when the planetary fortress exploded, under the bombardment of the universe extermination cannon that was thousands of times more powerful, the three-dimensional talisman around Luo Fan was slightly damaged. However, at this moment, under the even more terrifying heat, the three-dimensional talisman became clearer and more powerful. The reason for this was very simple. When Luo Fan repaired the three-dimensional talisman, he directly strengthened its heat resistance effect. In fact, he had fused his will into the three-dimensional talisman in the form of words, allowing everything in the universe and the chaos to read these words, and thus naturally bestowed its power to the three-dimensional talisman. Feeling the effect of the increasing heat in the surroundings, Luo Fan finally lost interest. He felt that the effect of the increasing heat in the surroundings was only pushing him deeper into the darkness. Whether it was the unseen depths or the gap between the universe and the chaos, they were like his back garden to Luo Fan. So what if he was pushed into the gap between the universe and the chaos? Could it give him any sense of novelty? Since it could not give him any sense of novelty, Luo Fan naturally had no interest in sensing the changes after the crystal wall shrank. With a thought, he turned into a stream of light and rushed out. In an instant, he broke through the unseen depths and rushed into nothingness. Then, he broke through the layers formed by the interweaving rules and laws, and rushed into the normal spacetime. At this moment, his position was already close to the crystal wall that originally enveloped the planetary fortress. He raised his hand and slapped it lightly. Bang! A hole with a circumference of 10 meters was blasted open on the crystal wall, and then countless strands of terrifying heat surged out of the hole and burned the space outside into nothingness. Chapter 1136. The crystal wall shrunk rapidly. The hole that Luo Fan blasted open was like the muzzle of a cannon. As the crystal wall shrunk rapidly, it constantly spewed out terrifying heat, turning a large area of spacetime in front of the hole into nothingness. This process lasted for a few breaths. After a few breaths, the crystal sphere had turned into a small crystal. It was a crystal that seemed to have no size and no distinction between inside and outside. Outside the crystal, there was a cone-shaped nothingness that stuck to the crystal. Luo Fan suddenly frowned. He lifted his foot and took a step forward. In the blink of an eye, he arrived next to the crystal. Then, he stretched out his hand to cover the crystal. In an instant, an indescribable space-time fluctuation appeared out of thin air and enveloped the crystal. At this moment, the crystal shook violently. The space-time fluctuation that enveloped Luo Fan shook violently. It was like a wild beast that was caught by a hunter and was struggling. In the process of this struggle, the crystal wall seemed to be slowly becoming illusory, as if it was about to disappear. Still want to run? It's not that easy, Luo Fan shouted faintly. He raised his hand and pointed at the crystal. A strong and unparalleled will suddenly poured into the crystal through his finger. As his will poured in, the crystal began to struggle even more violently. Then, with a soft bang, a large area of the surrounding space-time instantly collapsed. This kind of collapse was different from the previous state where it was burned into nothingness by the heat. Instead, it was like glass being shattered. The fine shattering made the surroundings seem to be shrouded in fog. Even Luo Fan's figure was covered by the fog. After that, the crystal finally calmed down completely, lying quietly in Luo Fan's hand. It looked like an ordinary crystal, completely unlike the previous crystal wall that could turn space-time into nothingness that the heat couldn't do anything to. He waved his hand gently. The thick fog in the surroundings instantly disappeared, as if it had never appeared. "Let me see what other secrets you have inside," Luo Fan said calmly. His will rushed into the crystal and fused with his will, forming something like a projection. It appeared inside the crystal. The inside of the crystal was not as narrow as it looked from the outside. Inside the crystal was a boundless starry sky. The starry sky was filled with endless starlight. At first glance, it looked exactly the same as the universe Luo Fan was in. However, upon closer inspection, one would discover that the boundless starlight was merely an illusory existence. Only the surrounding area, which was about the size of a star, was real and had complete spacetime. It was an area where the laws of nature existed. However, this region did not feel as if it was purely a void. Instead, it felt as if there was some sort of indescribable existence here. This kind of existence was nothing else but a strange star, a star that was shapeless and intangible, with only a kind of abstract quality. Luo Fan looked at this area. His eyes narrowed, and his angle of observation instantly changed. The entire star appeared in front of him. He looked at the star, and a look of realization appeared on his face. So that's how it is. It actually completely preserved the mark of the original living beings in this star. The space-time modifier actually has such a function. Such a thought flashed across Luo Fan's mind. At this moment, the star in front of Luo Fan was the planetary fortress that he had been in previously. It was also the planetary fortress that had been completely destroyed by the combined power of the universe obliteration cannon and the space-time modifier. Inside the planetary fortress, the living beings that originally existed in the planetary fortress acted as if nothing had happened. They were still living on the planetary fortress. One could not see the despair they had felt previously, and they would never have imagined that they had completely disappeared along with the planetary fortress. With Luo Fan's knowledge, he could tell at a glance that these were not real living beings. They did not look like the original people. They looked the same as before, but in fact they were just some marks. These marks preserved everything about these living beings. They contained all of their memories, all of their experiences, and all of their futures. If there was a special method to remove these marks and give them bodies and souls, then these marks would be able to grow back into the original living beings. There would be no change at all, not even a drop. This was obviously the power of the space-time modifier's energy. Such an unbelievable power could definitely be considered to be creating reincarnation. Very good technology. Luo Fan could not help but feel emotional as he looked at all these things. He now understood what was going to happen to the crystal wall just now. Just now, the crystal wall was clearly going to bring these marks back to where the space-time modifier was. It was either to return to its interior or to its side. If Luo Fan had not stopped it just now, the crystal wall would have disappeared in front of him. Originally, the disappearance of these marks should not have affected Luo Fan much. However, it was obvious that if he did nothing and allowed them to disappear in front of him, Luo Fan would not be Luo Fan. Moreover, it was not useless for Luo Fan to stop them now. At least, Luo Fan already knew that the space-time modifier had the ability to retain marks. In the future, when he went up against the space-time modifier, he would be prepared and would not make mistakes because he did not know about it. Since he understood the effect of his position, he was no longer as confused as before when he looked at the starlight that filled the sky. This position was where the marks of those living beings were kept. In that case, the illusory starlight in the outside world was naturally of the same nature. The reason why they were illusory was probably because they were not really here. The reason why the starlight appeared for Luo Fan to see was because this place was also modified by the space-time modifier and had an extremely special connection with those places. Therefore, the light could pass through the starlight and arrive here. Seeing this clearly, Luo Fan did not have the mood to stay here any longer. With a single thought, his will instantly broke through the barrier and rushed out of the crystal wall. He returned to his body. Hovering in the void, Luo Fan looked in the direction of the center of the country of eternity, where the huge star and planet were located. There was a vague, indescribable, mysterious existence there. It emitted an indescribable aura that enveloped the entire unbelievably huge country of eternity, tightly connecting the billions of stars and counties in the country of eternity. Judging from what he saw inside the crystal wall just now, every star in the entire country of eternity should have the energy of the space-time modifier. Similarly, there should also be a substance similar to the crystal wall. The energy and the crystal wall built a huge reincarnation system for all the living beings in the country of eternity, so that all the marks of the living beings in the country of eternity could be retained in the crystal wall after their death, and they could return to the universe through various special methods, regaining life. Thus, on a different level, allowing all the living beings in the country of eternity to live a long life. Although it's not a cultivation civilization and there's no real reincarnation, to be able to build an alternative reincarnation through such a method, it seems that the technological civilization isn't as bad as I thought. Luo Fan sighed. After sighing, He raised his hand and grabbed at the void, directly breaking through time and space. He broke through the layer of rules and laws, the layer of nothingness, and even the unseen, entering a dusky place. It was a place that belonged to the gap between heaven and earth and primal chaos. After arriving here, Luo Fan casually grabbed at a strange dusky existence, and abruptly pulled his hand back, bringing the dusky existence to the normal space-time. It arrived in front of him. Looking at the dusky existence, Luo Fan casually waved his hand, and the dusky existence turned into a three-dimensional talisman, which gently wrapped around the crystal wall. After that, Luo Fan covered it with the universe inside sleeve and put it into his universe inside sleeve. The reason for this defense was simple. It was to prevent the space-time modifier from discovering Luo Fan through the existence of the crystal wall. Luo Fan was quite unfamiliar with the various aspects of the space-time modifier, so it was obviously the right choice to do everything he could to defend himself. After doing all this, Luo Fan raised his foot and strode forward. His figure flickered between the void, and he headed towards a certain county in the country of eternity. This time, Luo Fan's speed was not too fast. The county that he chose was not the nearest county, but a very special one. It was a planet that he had previously inquired about in the information contained within the planetary fortress. Therefore, it took him more than half a day to arrive outside this galaxy. This galaxy looked very ordinary, similar to the Guotuan County that Luo Fan first saw after entering this universe. The stars were not big, but there were a lot of planets. Most importantly, the level of technology was similar to that of the Guotuan County. Luo Fan could even sense an existence similar to the flame giant in this central star. Of course, although it was similar, the technology used was different, the appearance was also different, and even the fighting style was vastly different. This is it. As soon as Luo Fan saw this place, he nodded in satisfaction. The level of technology of this county was definitely at the bottom of the entire country of eternity. In other words, this county was definitely at the bottom of the entire country of eternity. In other words, it was equivalent to a village in the third world on Earth. If one wanted to infiltrate such a place and obtain an identity in the country of eternity, it would be the easiest place compared to other places. Recalling the reason why he was discovered in the Guotuan County, Luo Fan completely restrained his perception this time, and only used his superior eyesight to observe the situation in this galaxy. In the end, he locked on to the most prosperous planet in this galaxy, turned his figure into nothingness, and headed towards that planet. After a while, he landed on the surface of that planet. The degree of prosperity of this planet was not much different from the capital or county of the Guotuan County. In fact, to some extent, Shanghai was much more advanced than the Guotuan County. The entire planet was densely packed with objects that looked like science fiction. There were hovercrafts, teleportation lights, holographic images, floating cities, and so on. Compared to this planet, Luo Fan's hometown before he transmigrated was at least thousands or even tens of thousands of years behind. Luo Fan's amazing eyesight had reached an unimaginable level. Sweeping his gaze across, he had already grasped the vast majority of the situation on the surface of the entire planet. Although it was not as detailed as using his perception, it was enough for him to find the location he needed. Still in his invisible state, he pressed his figure down and directly arrived at a government agency on this planet. Here, the entire county was in control. In other words, it was the proof of identity of everyone on this planet and all the other planets in this galaxy. The existence of anyone in this galaxy was legal, whether they had any criminal records, where they were born, where they grew up, what they did when they were young, what they did when they grew up, and so on. And so on and so forth. Everything was under the control of this organization. Therefore, if Luo Fan wanted to have the identity of a resident of this country of eternity, the best way was to control the staff here. Create an identity for himself, or let himself take someone's identity. After seeing the memories of several people, Luo Fan was no longer unfamiliar with the advanced technology here. He easily walked into the extremely gorgeous and magnificent building of this agency. Most of the machines here were automated, but as such an important area, there were naturally many staff. Someone immediately came up to ask Luo Fan. When he learned that he was here to reapply for an identity card, he brought him to an office. Here, a middle-aged man was sitting there. His body could only be considered strong, full of vitality, and he had at least a few hundred years of lifespan. Just as the middle-aged man was about to speak, Luo Fan had already lost his patience. He raised his hand and pointed at the middle-aged man. All of the middle-aged man's memories were completely grasped by him. After grasping the memories, he directly controlled the middle-aged man to operate the complex equipment he mastered, easily creating an identity for Luo Fan, replacing the identity of a dead person on this planet who still had his identity. Of course, this person's original name was not Luo Fan, but Luo Fan had no interest in calling other people's names. Otherwise, he could directly control any person on this planet, directly know everything about them, and then replace them. Why would he go through the trouble of coming to this government agency to directly modify it? Therefore, he directly controlled the middle-aged man to change the person's name, directly changing it to Luo Fan. This was not difficult, nor was it rare. No matter what world, it was impossible for everyone to be satisfied with the name given to them by others, even if it was their own parents who gave them the name. This star system that was tens of thousands of times more advanced than Earth's technology was naturally no exception. Therefore, Luo Fan controlled the middle-aged man to change the name of the identity he replaced. This happened almost all the time, no matter where it was, no one would suspect it. After doing this, Luo Fan directly erased this part of the middle-aged man's memory. After the middle-aged man woke up, he generously greeted him, saying that he did not want to change his name, and then swaggered out of the agency. After leaving, Luo Fan did not want to delay any longer, so he directly went to buy a ticket to the capital planet. Anyone in the entire country of eternity could go wherever they wanted to go, and the capital of the country of eternity was no exception. However, unless one had sufficient qualifications, no one could stay there for more than a week, which was the total amount of time a person spent there in their lifetime. In other words, although people who were not qualified to go to the capital could also go there, they could only go there for a vacation. The identity Luo Fan used was only that of an ordinary person, so of course he was not qualified to live in the capital permanently. Therefore, he could only go there for a vacation. Fortunately, this person did not use up the time to go to the capital, so there was still a chance to go to the capital. Otherwise, Luo Fan could only change his identity. When Luo Fan sat on the spaceship to the capital, half a day had passed. If the space-time modifier can still detect my existence, then I can only say that I'm impressed. Luo Fan sat cross-legged on the bed in the spaceship room, such a thought flashing in his mind. That's right, the reason why he did so many seemingly unnecessary things was to have a reasonable and legal identity to avoid the detection of the space-time modifier, so that he could easily enter the huge planet and get as close to the space-time modifier as possible. Otherwise, he would be discovered as soon as he entered the range of the space-time modifier, and thus suffer the space-time modifier's attack. Although he didn't think that he was powerless in front of the space-time modifier and could only be trampled upon, the power of the space-time modifier was too shocking, after all. It wasn't a pleasant thing to be attacked before they even came into contact with each other. Compared to Luo Fan's own speed, the flying speed of this spaceship was much slower. If Luo Fan walked at full speed, it would only take a few breaths at most to reach the center of the country of eternity from this star system. Even if he walked slowly and stopped while walking, it would not take more than 3 days to reach the destination. Chapter 1137. Evidently, Luo Fan had a month to wait before arriving at the capital of the Everlasting Kingdom. During this period of time, With Luo Fan's style of filling up all of his time, it was certainly impossible for him to waste it like this. Sitting cross-legged on the bed in his room, Luo Fan's mind slightly moved. His mind suddenly withdrew and entered a mysterious and strange place within his body. Here, there was a strange crystal floating in the void of time and space. The crystal was extremely mysterious as it slowly rotated in the space of nothingness. A light that seemed to be composed of countless souls was constantly expanding and contracting around the crystal like a beating heart. The moment Luo Fan arrived, the crystal trembled slightly. Following that, all the strange phenomena disappeared. A beautiful woman with an indifferent expression appeared next to the crystal. It was the Air Maiden. "You're here." The Air Maiden looked at Luo Fan with joy in her eyes and said. Luo Fan nodded and said with a smile, "Well, I'm here. I have a month this time." "Then why don't you follow me into the magic treasure to take a look and guide me along the way?" The Air Maiden was even more delighted. This was Luo Fan's purpose for coming here, so he naturally wouldn't have any objections. He immediately nodded and came to the side of the air hostess, pulling her towards the crystal. Their figures disappeared in an instant, and the crystal once again emitted rays of light that seemed to be composed of countless stars. They moved and shrank around the crystal, trembling and trembling like a heart. At this moment, Luo Fan and the Air Maiden felt that they had fallen into a boundless golden ocean. Countless souls, whether noble or ugly, clear or chaotic, powerful or weak, shuttled past the two of them in an instant. This magic treasure was a universe that Luo Fan had created himself. Then, he pushed the universe to an unimaginable peak and refined it. The minds of all the living beings in it were materialized by him, becoming existences that could be read and comprehended by the controller of the magic treasure at will. These specks of light that formed the boundless golden ocean were the souls. After pulling the air hostess into the magic treasure, Luo Fan returned the control authority to the air hostess. He let the Space Maiden lead him to choose the soul she wanted to sense. Soon, they landed in the most powerful and noble soul. Here, there was a world of boundless light. This was the spiritual world of the mind or the mental image world. It was a world formed from the moral and worldview of all living beings. This boundless world of light represented that the thoughts of the living beings were all positive and positive. On the other hand, if it was a world of darkness, it meant that the thoughts of all living beings were negative. Into this bright world, the Space Maiden turned into an unparalleled goddess and wielded the highest authority in this world. Luo Fan also turned into a god king and stayed by the goddess's side, wielding the same unparalleled authority with her. Sensing the changes in his body, Luo Fan could not help but smile. "Looks like you've already established great authority among these countless souls in just a short period of time." The air hostess also smiled. "Back then, in order to search for the characteristics of all the souls, I used my searching ability a few times. I've used the search divine ability a few times, and it must be at that time that made them feel that I'm supreme." She naturally knew what Luo Fan meant. This was the spiritual world of the living being. Everything here matched the living being's understanding. If the air hostess was a complete stranger to the living being and did not have any concept of her, she would only become a passerby after falling into the spiritual world. She would become an ordinary substance or living being with no sense of existence. The fact that the air hostess could turn into a goddess meant that she was unparalleled in the eyes of the living being, even if he had not actually seen her before. However, as the living being's subconscious, he could already sense that there was something familiar about the air hostess, so he naturally corresponded it with the image of the goddess. As for Luo Fan, there was no need to mention him. He was the creator of this universe and the creator who had guided this universe to become what it was today. His dignity was naturally engraved in the depths of the souls of all living beings. If he fell into the spiritual world of any living being, he would undoubtedly be a supreme existence like a god king, a holy lord, or a god. There was no other possibility. The two of them looked at each other and smiled. They strolled around the spiritual world hand in hand, carefully savoring the unique concepts of the various living beings revealed in the spiritual world. For Luo Fan, who had already formed his own worldview, this was just a pastime. He did not gain much. However, for the air hostess, who had yet to form her own worldview, even if the moral and worldview of this living being were very rough and had many mistakes, it was enough to have quite an impact on her. She would gain new insights from time to time. In the spiritual world, the flow of time was not synchronized with that of the outside world. Generally speaking, the flow of time in the spiritual world was faster than that of the outside world. This was easy to understand. When ordinary people plan things, wouldn't they develop over a few years or even a few decades in a short period of time? Didn't this mean that the flow of time in the spiritual world had developed over a few years or even a few decades in a short period of time in the outside world? Therefore, although Luo Fan only had a month's time, he had far more than a month's time in the spiritual world where he could move around freely. Under such circumstances, Luo Fan and the air hostess were not in a hurry. Instead, they walked leisurely. They spent 3 to 4 years walking through this boundless world of light. After that, they did not stop. They directly left this boundless world of light and stepped into another boundless world of darkness. After staying here for a few more years, they changed to another spiritual world. Just like that, one after the other, several thousand years had passed unknowingly. During the walk, Luo Fan did not directly explain any cultivation methods to the Space Maiden, nor did he give her pointers on how to construct her own worldview. Instead, he told her about the spiritual worlds that the composition of these spiritual worlds represented, the mind of living beings and the worldview of living beings. That was the morality of living beings. Unknowingly, the air hostess gradually became familiar with different worldviews. She gradually came to know that worldviews existed. Through the various differences in worldviews and morals in her spiritual world, Space Maiden gradually discovered many flaws that she had left behind in her cultivation, and she gradually made up for them. On this day, Luo Fan and the air hostess arrived at a spiritual world that looked almost identical to the universe that Luo Fan had created. Seeing such a spiritual world, the air hostess was shocked. She said to Luo Fan, "How can this person's spiritual world be like this? Could it be that this person has no emotions?" After seeing so many spiritual worlds, the air hostess had a rather deep understanding of the structure of spiritual worlds and the special relationship between living creatures. Any living creature that had emotions would definitely be affected by their emotions and become somewhat distorted. It might be difficult to understand if one were to talk about spiritual worlds alone. However, if one were to describe it in another way, the situation would be very clear. However, if one were to describe it in another way, the situation would be very clear. When the sun shone dazzlingly, they would feel so uncomfortable that they wanted to curl up into a ball and not go out. The sun was dazzling, and he felt so uncomfortable that he wanted to curl up into a ball and not go out. If it was a cloudy day, it would be even more unbearably dark. Not even light could be seen, and everything was blurry. It would make one feel like dying. On the other hand, if he was in a good mood, he would feel that everything was fine. On the other hand, if the sun shone brightly, they would feel cool and comfortable. On the other hand, if the sun shone, they would feel cool and comfortable. If the sun shone like that on the real world, the influence on the spiritual world that could change according to one's heart would only be greater and more shocking. The spiritual world that Luo Fan and the air hostess had visited previously. In addition, the many spiritual worlds that the air hostess had visited were all normal spiritual worlds. In other words, they were all vastly different from normal worlds. Due to the fluctuations in the emotions of living creatures, they would constantly change. They would produce all sorts of inexplicably distorted worlds. Even the spiritual worlds that were most similar to their real world only looked similar on the surface. There were still many huge differences and shocking distortions inside. At this moment, the world in front of Luo Fan and the air hostess was completely different. From the inside to the outside, be it the astronomical phenomena on the surface or the structure of the world in the deepest layer, everything was completely the same as their real world. How could the air hostess not be shocked by such a strange phenomenon? She even suspected that the owner of this spiritual world was an existence without emotions. It's not that he has no emotions. In fact, he has more emotions than anyone else. Luo Fan looked at the spiritual world and could not help but praise it in his heart. However, he said this to the air hostess. Then why is his spiritual world so similar to their real world? It's not distorted by his emotions at all. It's not affected by his emotions at all? The air hostess could not help but be surprised. Luo Fan naturally knew what was going on. However, he did not intend to tell the air hostess the reason. Instead, he planned to let the air hostess find out the reason herself. The reason why this living creature's spiritual world could be so real and so similar to the world he was in was none other than the fact that this living creature had initially established its own firm worldview. This worldview was different from the worldview that cultivators needed to establish to explain everything and the chaotic state. Instead, it was a simple worldview that allowed one to know the source of all the surrounding phenomena, to have no doubts about all the phenomena happening around them, and to have a firm belief in the principles behind them. This worldview could not make him a cultivation genius, nor could it be the concept that a cultivator relied on to become a sage. However, it had already revealed some of the embryonic form of a true worldview. From this, one could see the significance of a cultivator obtaining a worldview that truly belonged to himself. If such a simple worldview could prevent the spiritual world of a living creature from being affected by all emotions and emotions, then a worldview that truly belonged to a cultivator might be able to prevent the cultivator from being affected by all changes in the outside world and the chaotic state. This was something that Luo Fan could also say. However, the effect that he said and the effect that the air hostess saw and experienced were worlds apart. It was almost as big as the difference between cultivating a cultivation method taught by others and cultivating one's own cultivation method. Moreover, they were not in a hurry. Both Luo Fan and the air hostess had plenty of time to waste. Therefore, Luo Fan decided to leave this doubt for the air hostess and let the air hostess see for herself. She would feel and experience the mysteries revealed in it by herself. The air hostess looked at Luo Fan's smiling face and smiled. She understood his intention and did not ask any more questions. She just began to walk in this spiritual world and carefully sensed all kinds of things in this spiritual world. Then, she analyzed this spiritual world according to what Luo Fan had told her in the many spiritual worlds and experienced its mysteries. During this process, time gradually passed. Suddenly, one day, Luo Fan trembled slightly and said to the air hostess, "It's almost time, but I have to leave now. You don't need to be anxious about the mysteries of this spiritual world. Think quietly and comprehend. You don't have to stay in this spiritual world all the time. Go to other spiritual worlds and have a look. It might be better to comprehend through comparison. If you can comprehend something, it will be of great benefit to your future cultivation." The number of living creatures in this universe that Luo Fan had opened up had reached an unimaginable level. It had even exceeded the limits of what numbers could describe. Among such a huge number of living creatures, there would definitely be a lot of living creatures that could stabilize their spiritual worlds and not be affected by their own emotions. There would only be more spiritual worlds that were close to this level. That was why Luo Fan had said that. When the air hostess heard Luo Fan's words, she could not help but show reluctance in her eyes. All these years of traveling between the spiritual worlds of various living creatures with Luo Fan was the most wonderful and comfortable life that the air hostess had experienced in many years. During this process, she could feel a sense of satisfaction and relaxation at every moment. a sense of fullness. This made her wish that this kind of time could last forever. Now that she heard Luo Fan say that he wanted to leave, she was naturally reluctant. However, she also knew that Luo Fan had his own things to do. If she pestered him, she would only make things difficult for or even annoy Luo Fan. Therefore, although she was reluctant, she could only nod calmly. I will carefully experience it. You don't have to care about me. Go and do your own things. Luo Fan smiled slightly and held her hands. After looking at her for a moment, he gradually disappeared from this spiritual world. He did not stop at all as he disappeared from this magic treasure and returned to his body. The moment he returned to his body, he heard a broadcast from the spacecraft. This flight will arrive in 15 minutes. All passengers, please prepare your luggage and get ready to disembark. This flight will arrive in 15 minutes. All passengers, please prepare your luggage and get ready to disembark. This was repeated 3 times in a row. I've really arrived. Such a thought flashed through Luo Fan's mind. He went to the window of the room and looked out. He saw that the cosmic void that he had seen when he boarded the spacecraft had completely disappeared. In its place was an incomparably huge planet that covered the sky. The size of this planet had reached a shocking level. Looking out of the window of this room, the entire universe seemed to be covered by this planet. Even though he is still outside this planet, he can still see a thick atmosphere, but it still gives people the feeling that this planet has a round sky and a square earth. The land under the clouds is like an extremely flat and boundless land. I'm already here. It seems that the spacetime modifier didn't discover anything special about me. Luo Fan naturally won't be as shocked as ordinary people. He is currently looking at this planet, thinking about this in his mind. In Guotuan County, Luo Fan's perception was discovered by the detection equipment of Guotuan County. In this more technologically advanced planet, there is even a spacetime modifier, so Luo Fan naturally needs to be more cautious. Therefore, he did not spread out his perception. He only felt that in the center of this huge planet, there seems to be a strange existence that can even threaten him. In addition, what that existence looks like, what incredible characteristics it has, and how powerful it is, he can't detect any of these. Unless he can spread out his perception without any scruples and personally contact that existence. Otherwise, his perception of that existence will only be limited to this level. After a quarter of an hour, the spacecraft landed on a port outside the planet. Regarding this, Luo Fan has already learned about it. The technological products on this capital planet far surpass any county in the country of eternity outside, and it's not just an ordinary surpassing, but a world of difference. This kind of transcendence made everything on the capital planet look so primitive and natural that no traces of technology could be seen. Because of this, all technological products from the outside world can't enter the capital planet. Even these spaceships that transport passengers into the capital planet can only dock at the spaceport outside the planet. Chapter 1138. After getting off the spaceship, Luo Fan was not unconventional. He was guided to a device that looked like a phone booth along with all the other passengers. It turns out to be energy transmission. With this level of technology, such a technology should indeed be developed. Luo Fan looked at the passengers who walked into the phone booth-like device one after another, and such a thought flashed in his mind. After he stepped into the device, he found that the space inside was more than 10 times larger than it looked from the outside. The surrounding light and shadows were flowing, and it looked like he had appeared in an illusory space. Not all of the passengers who had entered before him had been sent away. Instead, they were still waiting for the passengers behind them. When the number of passengers reached 100, a wave of energy surged out from all directions and enveloped everyone. For other passengers, being wrapped by this energy was nothing more than being wrapped around. In the blink of an eye, they had already crossed the vast space and arrived on the surface of the planet. But for Luo Fan, all the operation of this energy was felt by him at this moment without any reservation. This energy first caused the surrounding time and space to distort slightly. This distortion was not strong, and it did not even cause damage to the space-time structure of this universe. However, because of the integrity of the entire spacetime, this distortion aroused the rebound of the entire spacetime of the universe. It caused the normal spacetime in other places to produce an indescribable force, and then all the matter wrapped by this energy, including living beings, crossed a long distance from the spacetime port directly to the surface of the planet through some way that transcended spacetime. When all the changes subsided, Luo Fan and the 99 passengers around him had arrived at a place that also looked like an illusory space. "Passengers, please walk out of the teleportation room in order. You have now set foot on the surface of the capital planet." A leisurely and pleasant female voice came into everyone's ears, and then the door opened and extremely rich energy poured in, making everyone feel inexplicably comfortable. Everyone could not wait to walk out of the place that looked like a door. As soon as they went out and looked back, they found that it was not the phone booth-like device that they had seen in the spaceport before. Instead, it was a pitch-black hole. It seemed that there were no traces of human creations on it at all. Clap, 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 the sound of flapping wings came from above their heads, and then a white crane as tall as a man descended from the sky and landed in front of all the passengers. After the white crane landed, it didn't waste any time and explained the general situation of the capital planet to the passengers. It also provided many essential items for traveling, such as maps and transportation. There were tools to ensure safety, food and drinks, various places of interest and historical sites, and so on. The degree of completeness was really amazing. Of course, in contrast to this degree of completeness, the cost was also enough to make one's heart tremble. No wonder a person can only stay here for a week in their lifetime. If an ordinary person were to work for a lifetime, I'm afraid it would only be enough for him to stay here for a week. A tourist not far away from Luo Fan sighed with emotion as he listened to the white crane's introduction. Hearing this, Luo Fan smiled. He glanced over and found that it was a middle-aged man. He was dressed decently, but that was all. He didn't look luxurious at all. Obviously, he wasn't a rich person. When the man saw Luo Fan looking at him, he nodded to Luo Fan with a smile and said, "Hello, my name is Dorajimo. What's your name?" Luo Fan. Luo Fan had always reported his real name when he registered. This was the case even if he didn't have a legal identity, let alone his current identity. "Good name. I think it's your first time here. Why don't we travel together? Before I came here, I studied the capital planet. Although the places mentioned by the guide also had good scenery, they weren't the most beautiful places on the capital planet. If I wasted my time on those places, I would have to pay for them. This time, we've spent our entire fortune on this trip, but it's all for naught." Dragom said to Luo Fan very enthusiastically. "Huh? Do you know any special places? How about I join too?" At this time, a woman's voice interjected. Dorajimo frowned, obviously dissatisfied with the interruption, but when he looked back, he saw that the woman was not extremely beautiful. He discovered that although the woman's appearance was not extremely beautiful, she was still delicate and pretty. His expression instantly changed into a joyful one. He said, "Of course I welcome you. The more people, the better. How should I address you, miss?" "My name is Eisen. I also spent my family's fortune to travel to the capital planet. If this trip is a wasted trip, it would be a big loss." The woman first nodded to Luo Fan, then smiled. "That's right." Dorajimu nodded his head in agreement. "Do you have anything to recommend?" "The scenery I heard from the guide just now is very good," Luo Fan said with a smile. "You're a classic example of being fooled. These guides are just man-made objects, equivalent to the robots in our county. Their setting is to send us away in the simplest way, and the places they point out are the most ordinary places. It's basically opened up for tourists like us. How can we really see the characteristics of the capital planet? In my opinion, the most important thing on the capital planet is our supreme creation, the space-time remodeling instrument. If we don't see the space-time remodeling instrument when we come to the capital planet, it's a waste of effort, Dorajimo said very proudly. With a beautiful woman standing next to him and watching, his desire to perform was greatly increased. Compared to when he was alone with Luo Fan, he was much more enthusiastic. Luo Fan originally just listened quietly to Dorajimo's words, and he didn't have much intention to travel with him. But now that he heard him mention the space-time remodeling instrument, he couldn't help but be surprised. Space-time remodeling instrument? That's the most important treasure of our country. How can it be open to tourists like us? I think you've been fooled, Luo Fan said deliberately. Aizen also looked suspiciously at Doraguru, obviously thinking that Luo Fan's words made sense. However, there was a look of anticipation in her eyes that could not be ignored. She clearly hoped that what Dorajurta said was true, and that she really hoped that she could see the space-time modifier. This was only natural. For all the residents of the Kingdom of Eternity, the prestige of the space-time remodeler had long been deeply rooted in their hearts. As long as one had the slightest bit of curiosity towards this great creation that was said to be able to create a new world, they would definitely be able to understand it. They were all looking forward to seeing it. Being stared at like this, Dorajimu became excited. Of course I won't be fooled. The space-time modifier is not open for us to visit. However, in one place, we can see the appearance of the space-time modifier. At the very least, the space-time modifier's energy had appeared. I spent a lot of money to buy this travel guide. If it weren't for the fact that you two hit it off, I wouldn't have told you. I can see where the space-time modifier appeared. What is that place? Luo Fan asked. This is a secret. Now that there are so many people, why don't we walk and talk? Dorajimu looked around and found that although most of the tourists had dispersed, there were still some who were discussing something in groups of 2s and 3s. Obviously, they had not decided where to go. With Luo Fan's cultivation, he could tell at a glance that although Dorajimu was hiding something, he was telling the truth. However, what he said was the truth. Moreover, even if he was deceived by him, he wouldn't care. Therefore, he nodded and directly agreed to Dorajimu's proposal. Although Aizen did not have Luo Fan's ability, the attraction of the space-time modifier overpowered everything. In the end, he nodded and agreed to Dorajimu's proposal. Since the three of them had already agreed, he did not hesitate to recite a code that seemed like an incantation according to the previous guide's words. As soon as the words were spoken, a soft roar came from the sky. Along with the roar, a creature that looked like a rhinoceros stepped on the void in mid-air and walked towards them. The rhinoceros did not look fast, but in just a few seconds, it had already walked in front of them from the void. Sure enough, it's still an energy creation. Luo Fan looked up at the rhinoceros and instantly saw through the entire structure of the rhinoceros like a butcher dissecting an ox. The rhinoceros was actually a product of energy materialization. All kinds of strange and special energy, under the action of some special mechanism, condensed into complex parts and combined into this vivid rhinoceros. They condensed into complex parts and assembled into this vivid rhinoceros. The previous white crane structure was just a mass of energy. Although it was materialized, there was not much special structure inside. Previously, the white crane structure was just a mass of energy. Although it had materialized, there weren't too many special structures inside. The previous white crane structure was just a mass of energy. Although it was materialized, there was not much special structure inside. It looked like a marionette, always under the control of some existence. Compared with the previous white crane, the white crane was like a tram connected to a wire, while this rhinoceros was like a car that burned gasoline. The difference between the two was this degree of freedom. After the rhinoceros landed in front of the three of them, it shook slightly. The energy parts inside were constantly changing, directly growing a hole in the middle like a car door. Through this hole, they could see that there were 3 luxurious seats inside the rhinoceros. It looked like a luxurious lounge. This was actually the reason why Doragmer had to bring Luo Fan and Eisen with him on this trip. It was too expensive to rent this rhinoceros. It was almost equivalent to Doragmer's income from working for several years. By bringing Luo Fan and Eisen, they could at least share the price and reduce the cost by 2/3. Why not? The 3 of them entered the interior of the rhinoceros and each picked a seat to sit down on. The door that the rhinoceros had opened before was closed again, but there were a few window-like holes on its back and shoulders. These holes were covered by an energy film, allowing them to see all kinds of changes in the outside world. Next, the rhinoceros stomped on the ground, its body rushed straight up, and it began to walk in the air just like before. The whole process was so elegant and natural that Luo Fan and the other 2 did not feel any vibration at all, nor did they feel the knife-like air outside. This capital planet is really convenient. It would be great if I could migrate to the capital planet one day. Doragmer suddenly sighed. Don't even think about it. I heard that every resident of the capital planet is independent and doesn't rely on external help. Moreover, the technology and power each of them has mastered can easily compare to any county. If you want to migrate here, you must first have the financial resources to buy your entire county, Eisen said. I'm just saying, Doragmer said embarrassedly. How do the residents of the capital planet live? Luo Fan asked at this time. You don't know. When Doragmer heard this, he looked at Luo Fan as if he was looking at an ignorant idiot. That kind of inconceivable and unbelievable feeling was really unbearable. Luo Fan didn't care at all. He smiled faintly and said, I know a little, but it's only a rough understanding. Of course, I'm far worse than you. These words made Doragmer suddenly understand. Indeed, few people have such a deep understanding of the capital planet as he does. He even knows where to find the space-time modifier. Who can compare to him? Therefore, he nodded with satisfaction and said, It's true. Since you want to know so much, I'll tell you. After saying that, he glanced at Eisen and found that she was also looking at him with a burning gaze. He couldn't help but show a more proud look on his face. He said, The level of technology of the capital planet has far surpassed all the counties of the Eternal Country. Here, when all residents are born, they will be planted with something called a world seed by the space-time modifier. This world seed can grow with the growth of people. When they grow up to 120 years old, this world seed will grow into a real world. This world can create everything that the residents can understand, can provide everything they need to survive, and even some powerful worlds. It can also transform and give back to the body, giving the residents unimaginable power. Therefore, the residents of the capital planet are actually their own independent world. They are self-sufficient and don't rely on outsiders. Even if they are thrown into the void of the universe alone, they can live extremely well. Having said that, Doragmer's eyes showed a look of envy. Eisen, who was next to him, also had a look of longing. Listening to this description, Luo Fan suddenly understood. He had an understanding of the way the residents of the capital of the Eternal Country live. However, he was not fooled by Doragmer. The world seed, I think it's at most a brain with a little space-time characteristics created by the space-time modifier. If it was a real world, every resident would probably be immortal. Why would they need the space-time modifier to create reincarnation? Such a thought flashed in Luo Fan's mind. Anyone, even ordinary people, as long as they have a real world, they can naturally easily obtain infinite power from the world, thereby completely replenishing all their consumption. among them, including the consumption of life. This was, in another sense, achieving immortality. Obviously, although the residents of the capital planet of the country of eternity had extremely long lifespans, they couldn't achieve immortality. This clearly indicated that the world seed obtained by the residents of the capital planet wasn't a real world seed at all, let alone a real world. However, even if this was not a real world seed, not a real world, Luo Fan was still very interested in it. After all, this was a technological creation that Luo Fan had never understood. He could certainly see more creativity than the flame giant, which could give him more insights. Where do those residents live now? Why haven't I seen any of them? Aizen suddenly asked. They all live in their own worlds, hidden all over the planet. You think you haven't seen them, but maybe you have already seen them. Daragmer recovered from his envy and longing and sighed. Perhaps a certain tree you've seen before is a certain world, and a certain resident lives in it. Perhaps a certain stone you've seen is a world, a certain bird flying in the sky, a certain beast on the ground, and so on and so forth. Everything could be the world of a certain resident, Dragom casually pointed as he spoke. There was a deep sense of loss in his words. Was there anything more painful in this world than facing something you longed for and envied, but not being able to distinguish it at all? How could this be? Aizen's face was now full of shock. Although she knew about the capital planet, it was obviously only a general understanding. Her research was not very detailed. She only knew that the residents of the capital planet were very amazing, very powerful, self-contained, and did not rely on outsiders. She didn't know what kind of living conditions they had. Now that she really knew how they lived, she was shocked for a time. It was as if she had stepped into a great world that she could not imagine. At this point, the two of them had already lost the desire to talk. They quietly looked at the scenery of the capital planet below them, wondering if this was a world, and if that was a world. Luo Fan listened to the conversation between the two of them, secretly admiring them in his heart. Is this the same goal by different means? This technological civilization has developed to this level, and it is actually so similar to the cultivation civilization. These worlds are similar to the cultivator's cave. Such a thought flashed in his mind. With this thought in mind, he, like Daragmer, observed the various sceneries that streaked across the land below.